The broadcast is live. Here we go. Good evening, everyone.
The broadcast is evening.
I think I'll turn off that giant glowing orb on the ceiling.
So it really should be the narrowcast is live.
There we go. That's much better.
Because this isn't really broadcasting, I don't think. Because broadcast has to be over a wide spectrum. This is narrowcasting. We're over a narrow spectrum.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I guess we can put it on the radio.
Good evening, Comic Crack.
Oh, let's see who's
By the way, Comic Crack and I were having a discussion last week about when exactly the kayfabe channel get and after it was over, I was like, you know what? Neither of us has any hard data. Without any hard data, we're just like arguing our feelings.
hard data on what?
On when cartoonist kayfabe's channel became popular, before or after whatever I can't even remember what we were exactly arguing.
Oh God, no! But I actually can't because I can tell you what comic book convention I was at the year that everybody was talking about what comic book kayfabe was it? That was great. Yeah, like people were drawing characters like logs attacking firemen and stuff like that.
No. Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg have a channel called Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Oh, never mind.
Which has gotten they got about 60,000 subscribers now. It's gotten really popular over the last few years. And Terrence and I it wasn't even an argument. We were just discussing it. When they got popular, I was saying it was kind of their channel took off after he did his Marvel book. He was saying he took off before. But like neither of us have any actual data. So it's kind of like
unless you had access to their YouTube.
Yeah, unless we were paying attention, which we weren't.
You'd never know.
Yeah, but you can tell how many people watched each video, because people don't usually go back to watch older videos. So if it starts going up, you know when they got popular.
I'm one of those weird people that once I find something like that, I'll go back and watch the old videos.
Yeah.
That depends how many videos. More than 12, no.
I think it also depends on the top. My videos with the longest tail that are evergreen, more evergreen. It's like every week I do my my comic book haul video,
right,
which gets me about 150 views, and that's about it. They don't have a long tail. But my taking a look videos of the artist editions, they'll start out with 150 views, but then I'll look at them 3 years later and they'll have 3,000 views.
Right? Yeah, people will be
because those are kind of, when somebody Googles in Silver Surfer artist edition, that comes up.
Yeah. I did a 5-part series on Wildstorm around the same time that they had the 25th anniversary, and the first video keeps going up in views. Yeah. The other ones don't.
Yeah. That's that reminds me of Eric Larson talking about people keep asking him, are you going to put out Savage Dragon in hardcovers? And he's like, no, because I know exactly how it'll go. The first 3 or 4 issues will sell fine, and after that, nothing. And then to say the first part of the video everybody watches, that's enough.
Yeah, you can't blame people for that one. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
it's true. But then you never know when the internet will rear back around and pick something out of the past. Spawn's now one of the best-selling comics again. How crazy is that? 2 weeks ago, we were all arguing about that J. Scott Campbell piece again from 2009. It's just amazing. Things bubble back up to the surface.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it's a long time now. Anyway. To the past. Salute.
To the past. Huzzah. If it wasn't for the past, we have no comics to talk about. That's where almost all the comics are, in the past. That's true.
That's where all of them are.
And the more comics they make, the more comics there are in the past.
Yeah, they're stealing our comics.
They have a monopoly on that stuff, don't they?
Yeah. We need a 2-hour movie about Tom Cruise fixing this problem.
Which I have the comic of, and it's very good.
Oh, yeah.
Matter of fact, I'm going to walk over to my shelf and show it to you. It's this one right here. with that distinctly Japanese name, All You Need Is Kill.
Yeah. That's so much better than Edge of Tomorrow.
This is what Edge of Tomorrow is based on, and it's really good, I have to say, because like I saw Edge of Tomorrow for the first time maybe last year, and I wrote on Facebook, I saw it and liked it. I think it was Oliver Kirby said, "Oh, check out the manga it's based on.
Yeah,
it's really good."
Yeah.
I was like, okay, and I got it on Amazon for a couple of bucks, and it's one volume that thick. It's a really good story. They did a nice job with it. And funny, before this was actually a Japanese young adult novel. So first was the Japanese young adult novel, then came the comic, and then came the movie. So it was like, this all comes from a Japanese young adult novel.
In my opinion, that's how media properties are supposed to go. That's just right.
They're just not supposed to go on forever until we're not interested in them,
No. I think things go through, like, artistically, I think things go through phases where, like, you get in periods where originality is valued, and then you get in periods where like sticking to tradition is valued and stuff like that. And I think we're going in between two such positions right now.
Well, I to me, like, just in terms of comics, I think all like corporate owned comics are all destined to be Silver Age DC. I just think that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
Where everybody's got a family. There's 9 versions of each character. It's kind of written in a generic way. Not bad. Like Silver Age DC was some of the best. 50s, some of the best-selling comics out there. They were the dominant, but when you look back at them now, there's not creatively, they're not the greatest thing in the world. As craft, they're pretty well done.
Right.
As as sort of as corporate objects, they're well done. They did their job. They entertained small children for a brief time.
Yeah.
But that's not what we expect of comics now.
No, we have too many expectations. Tom Spurgeon, the reporter, had something really intelligent he said about this. I can find the exact quote, but it was something like, to people of a particular age, comics made a promise and delivered on it. Like, we were expecting comics to evolve from superhero fantasies into incredibly complex adult works of art that fulfilled all the requirements of a great novel or what have you, and they have. Yeah,
because most people really don't want that, it turns out.
Yeah, that was the problem.
Most people really just want an exciting Spider-Man and Batman story. That's what most people want.
As a generation, we did not know that we didn't want what we thought we wanted.
Well, I think we thought that's what we always wanted. It's just that we didn't pay attention to all those people who just cared about getting the latest Batman because that's what they cared about. Because we don't pay attention. They're not loud. They're not that loud. And, they were on the internet or anything. Well, now they became louder when they didn't like their Batmans or Spider-Mans anymore. But they're not. Here's an interesting topic that speaking of the comic book marketplace, that I really can't answer because I'm not a back issue guy. But on the New York Warriors, who are another group of YouTubers, who Big E just asked me to be on his show because I've been on their show a couple times, but not in years. He was like, "Oh, I should come on again sometime." But I was just checking out one of their shows this past weekend because they do a lot of television and movie and hot comic stuff. But the thing the question Big E was asking, which I think his answer was no, but they really didn't get into it as deeply as I would have liked because they were the ones who go out to shows, is, collectibles have shot up all collectibles have, comics included, in the since COVID have shot up in prices astronomically, some of them. Yeah. And the question Big E was asking was that reflected in the comic book community at all? meaning he's starting to go to comic book shows again and buying back issues and stuff, and all the big wall books are still there with bigger prices on them. Is anyone in the comic book community buying them at those big prices? And I was like, I don't know, but that's an interesting question. Or is it all just other people, whoever came in during COVID to drive the prices up? I was like, I don't know. I haven't seen on YouTube anyone getting any big books lately.
Printing's gotten more expensive too. So I assume that was what was behind the prices, is like people trying to get more money out of fewer customers and pay the printing prices. But I don't know.
I'm talking old. We're talking old comics, not new ones.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Old
I thought you were talking about like omnibus editions. Like you're talking about like, yeah, I got you.
I'm talking about there's $1,000 comics that in the last 18 months are now $3,000 comics.
Really?
There's $300 comics that in the last 18 months are now $1,000 comics. And a lot of people think that it's not. Like the question Big E was asking is it us YouTubers who have been going out and buying comics and showing our videos on YouTube? Are we the ones are we paying these prices and driving it up, or is it all outsiders? Because like he said, he wasn't seeing anybody at the few cons he's been at since buying the big wall books.
That's a really interesting question.
Had a couple of big, bought a pre-COVID price. Okay.
What'd you get?
Strange Tales 115 and Doctor Strange 169. There we go. Doctor Strange 169. I think it's got a really nice Dan Adkins cover, and I think that's one of the things. Besides being the first Doctor Strange solo, but it was when they changed Strange Tales title to Doctor Strange. But I think it's really the quality of the cover has driven that book up over the years too, because I've seen a lot of people collect that book just for the cover.
Yeah, that's an iconic cover. It's got a good splash page too. I'm looking at it. It's Thomas and Dan Adkins was the artist.
Very famous cover. Everybody loves that one.
Just a lovely splash page. I'm in love with the splash page.
And by the way, I will approve the use of iconic in this situation, because I think people overuse people use iconic wrong. People use iconic as a synonym for famous, and it's not.
No, it's a bit beyond that.
Iconic literally means picture-like. But there's, which is while you would call like a view of Niagara Falls, you'd call iconic because it looks like a picture. But there's also a meaning that comes from religious icons where it's a picture that's worshipped. So that Doctor Strange 169, I think could be called iconic because there is a sort of element of worship there for people. That's how much they like it. But I've heard people call things iconic that were in no way, shape, or form.
No, but I see what you mean, because nothing's happening in that cover. It's not a very dynamic. It's not a dynamic cover at all. There's no action, but it does draw you in. You can feel what Doctor Strange is about just by looking at that cover.
It's got great imagery.
If you were just to imagine Doctor Strange, you would imagine something very much like that.
Yeah. A great story as well.
Yeah. Before we go too far, I had a very grim thought that you just reminded me of. I went to a flea market a couple days ago, and I just went, I had a few minutes, so I went through every single booth. And I saw, Central Kentucky booths dedicated to Funko Pops, entire booths of it.
Oh,
but now that I think about it, there were like 200 booths. I did not see one single comic book in the entire thing.
Mm. Wow. Funko Pops make more money.
I went to Barnes & Noble today, the local one, and they had rearranged their different sections. Their manga section now, the local one now, is larger than their science fiction section is.
Really?
And in this area, I mean, granted, I may be making a gross exaggeration. I don't see how they could possibly sell that much manga in this area. I just don't see it.
Interesting.
I know that
Tim had an interesting.
Oh, sorry.
Tim had an interesting observation. He did a video just before, at like 4:00. He did a live video, he had gone to the flea market. Scott mentioned to us before, and he picked up a bunch of books, including some really early Alan Moore Swamp Things.
Yeah.
And he said he got them all for $1 a piece or whatever. And he looked up, and then the price on them was like $80 altogether for the stuff he got for $4. Right. But it was a guy he knows. I guess he's a regular. And he was thumbing through the box of dollar books and picked out the ones he wanted. And the guy told him he said the guy isn't even really into comic books. He's just a reseller. Yeah. And the guy told him he was watching, and like Tim was like the first one to buy something out of those books out of like 13 people. And Tim was saying and these Swamp Things were in there. Clearly, good, valuable books. Yeah. Right. And he's like he was hypothesizing that YouTube has people looking for the same 20 books. So everybody's watching the same videos and looking at the same hot lists and looking for the same 20 books. So if they don't find them, they just pass over everything else. And I thought that was an interesting observation of what might be going on.
They're never going to look at something that's weird and out of the ordinary like this and say, let me check that out.
Right. But even Swamp Thing, though, is even a valuable book, though. Like, that isn't a valuable book, so they're never going to look for it. But Swamp Thing
got to a point where people don't care that things were made by Alan Moore.
Yeah.
We are getting to that point, yeah. But, I mean, on the other hand, Hellblazer, John Constantine is the only actual new character of our generation, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you would think just early appearances of John Constantine would be valuable. But I suppose not. I don't know.
But I mean, also
it cycles.
Yeah.
If you're a collector looking through dollar bins for $20 books, Swamp Thing is an obvious one. Early Swamp Things.
Yeah.
Have a fun barbecue. Nice. So to me, it's like that's one maybe you should know is early Swamp. But I guess not everybody does. Especially people who just learn from YouTube or whatever.
You're talking about YouTube influence. That kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier, which is what people call the kayfabe effect.
Right.
Those guys do a video, and then all of a sudden, the book they talk about, everybody jacks the price up on it.
Right.
Wow.
I have heard that referred to before. Because they like to find old crappy comics from the 80s, outlaw comics as they call them, like really fringe indie stuff from like the black and white boom, and they like that stuff, and they like to go through it.
Well, I'm sure the point of this show is not to advertise another person's show, but that sounds sort of interesting. Like, what have they talked about?
Oh, everything. I had to unsubscribe to them because they fill up my feed with stuff. They do like 3 or 4 because they're really selling their own stuff on it too. Mm-hmm. That's
absolutely.
Ed Piskor just came out with Red Room, his latest comic from Fantagraphics. So they get 3 or 4 videos out a week on like they did a whole bunch of stuff on Wizard magazine. That's how they got started looking through old. They did all the stuff we've already done, except they got famous doing it.
Yeah, well,
they were already kind of
knocked on the door and somebody else answered. Like, you did the heavy lifting. Oh yeah,
probably for a lot of people that watch them, they're not going to be as familiar with that. They don't have
they're not
that we do.
They really bring a lot of indie stuff to the masses a little more, even though they're 2 indie guys themselves, but.
Yeah, I'm looking. I've read some of Ed Piskor's stuff. It's like I get what he's doing. I wish I could say it excited me. But yeah, he's a good cartoonist. He's trying to solve the same problem everybody else is of how to make a computer comic that looks good and tells a story. And it looks like he's just chosen to really imitate the sort of Lynn Claire house style of the early '80s.
The one he just came out with, Red Room, is very Robert Crumb. Who am I thinking of? Oh, the chicken, the turkey, the roosters are going.
Or maybe, yeah.
Robert Crumb and who's the I
Dan
keep
Clouse?
Spiegelman's name is in my head, but it's not him. The guy who does the realistic portraits.
Basil Wolverton.
No.
Nope. There's some Wolverton in it.
Guy from New York. I can't remember his name either.
Yes.
Drew Friedman.
Drew Friedman. Little Drew Friedman, little Robert Crumb, little Basil Wolverton. Yeah, he did X-Men Grand Design. Ed Piskor did Grand Design. That's right, and I think Jim Rugg did Fantastic Four Grand Design.
That was Tom Scioli.
That was Tom Scioli did Fantastic Four Grand Design.
Okay. Oh, actually, now that you mentioned it, I have that right behind me.
I do have a Jim Rugg graphic novel from about 15 years ago called
this one right
here. Yeah.
Yep.
That's Tom Scioli, right? Ed Piskor did the first one like that, which was the X-Men.
Yeah, I have a Jim Rugg graphic novel from about 15 years ago called One Model Nation, which was made with the vocalist from what band? Dandy Warhols? Can't remember.
My Chemical Romance, right? The guy who's friends with.
No. No. Gerard Way did that DC stuff.
Right.
Yeah, Gerard Way.
No, I'm talking about Courtney Taylor.
Oh.
Yes, and what Tim was saying is that they don't. It's not even that they pull out the key. They pull out the keys they learned from YouTube, even. So it's like whatever the 20 hot comics are on YouTube or on what is that Key Collector app or something like that. Those are the ones they know. They didn't know Alan Moore's Swamp Thing were hot books. They passed them right by, and Tim got them.
Well, Tim's gained, they're lost. Yeah, I'm going back and forth between if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. But like this, I got this, and I got it from the library, and I'm trying to read it, but
yeah, that's not my. That's the exact continuity I don't like.
Yeah, I used to love Marvel Age. I used to love those magazines that just told you what happened in other ones, but like the lettering was big enough you could read them. This is just selling me nostalgia, to be honest, and I want a little bit more. It
really isn't, and I don't like the yellowing of the pages effect. That was never my thing.
It's not deserved.
I fast forwarded itself from into the beginning in their current videos. I still enjoy them, but their love on the 90s is a little too hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you all know who Fletcher Hanks is? Fletcher Hawks? Everybody's talking about?
Oh, yeah.
That was a name.
So I have a theory about him.
Right.
I don't think he's real.
You don't think he's real?
I think the person because nobody ever read any of his comics until that book came out. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody's read them yet. I've never seen any of his comics anywhere besides that book. I think that maybe the guy who wrote that book just made him up.
He was in Art Before Time, which is before I knew Fletcher before the Fletcher Hanks books. They're Art Out of Time. That's it.
So you had heard of him before that?
Unknown cartoonists, and he was in there.
Okay, well, so much for that theory. But okay, so sticking with the theory for just a second, even though it's already disproven, let's just pretend.
I'm just saying you have to push your hypothesis back 2 books.
Yeah, if I wanted to fake a cartoonist, like that guy, like John Lurie faked a blues musician a couple of years ago.
Right.
Like people do stuff like this. If I wanted to fake an old comic book, then this yellowing stuff would be fantastic. And I've read other things by this guy, by Scioli, that I absolutely adore. But this, it just feels like forced nostalgia. There's no.
I was a big fan. It'd be really cool to fake a cool cartoonist. Yeah. So if you were to fake Fletcher Hanks, what you would do is first put him in the book called Art Out of Time with a bunch of real forgotten cartoonists and throw him in there.
Yeah.
And then have him have his own book.
That's just how diabolical.
Just because he was in Art Out of Time doesn't mean he's not fake. But did you read the Fletcher Hanks book?
I read both of them.
Yeah, he's actually good.
Yeah.
He's not one of these so bad it's good guys. He's actually talented and good. I mean, the stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
But the stuff is actually good too. I was surprised when I finally read it that it was good, because I expected one of these so bad it's good things, which I'm really not into these days. But I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, like the Wesley Willis thing. I like to be exactly.
Well, that also brings up "It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken" by Seth, one of my favorites, which was about semi-autobiographical. Yeah, there we go. Semi-autobiographical one about him tracking down this New Yorker cartoonist who only did a few cartoons for New Yorker in like the 30s and 40s, and he's trying to figure out this guy's career. And then when people found out he made up the cartoonist, they got upset.
Promethea has a Marston analog who's quite plausible.
Yeah. Comic shop is on. Ooh, Gorvial's got a new comic shop on his way. All right. Wants to see my first new comic of the week was Casual Fling #4 of 4.
That logo, man.
The logo is one of the worst logos ever.
That logo deserves to be flung.
It's very.
Rain Like Hammers has a logo that's annoying because it's unreadable, but at least it's stylish.
I think that one works.
This has one of those art students. I'll just take 2 fonts and put them together logos. That's just like, terrible.
Jared, can you casually fling that comic across your room?
No,
we have to like something at some point.
I bought all 4 issues and enjoyed them.
Yeah, just the logo.
But just the logo is terrible. You want me to show you some of the artwork? I'll do that. The artwork is solid. Storytelling is good. Where's my share screen? Solo layout. Here's a little bit of... This issue had a lot of talking heads. And it's a crime story, mostly about the victims of a woman has a casual fling and then is blackmailed. Like the art isn't as good in this issue because there's a lot of these talking heads. And it was well done, but it's just not as visually impressive because there's a lot of those talking heads pages.
Right.
And like a woman has a casual fling, gets blackmailed, tells her husband, has 2 kids. They all try to figure out what to do. And the husband works in computers. They try to track down the blackmailer. And this issue was good, but actually a little anticlimactic because it ended just about how you thought it would end. They got the blackmailer in the end. So I don't want to say it's bad, but there was nothing spectacular about the end. It was the ending you expected. It was kind of like a good episode of a crime TV show sort of thing. And I enjoyed that because you don't get a ton of that in comics. I'm too artsy with this cover. Yeah, it's like student level artsy is the problem with that logo. That's like when students first start designing logos on computers. That's what they do. They go, "Ooh, we'll make casual, and we'll make flingy." And you're like, "No, stop it."
And then they start using pastel colors, and it all looks like Miami Vice all over again.
It does look like Miami Vice. Well, maybe that's what they want, GTA is big these days.
But yeah, it was nice little. But like I got 8 comics this week, which was big again. But once again, this summer my pull list is falling off a cliff because that was issue 4 of 4. I've got a few more that are ending. Like this is ending. This is issue 43 and is going to issue 48. Manifest Destiny.
Oh, really?
This one's fun. Yeah,
it's a great comic.
Yeah, the story of Lewis and Clark, by creators who know nothing about Lewis and Clark, but they're having them fight monsters as they cross. In 1805, it said the year is as they cross.
I think it's the writer lives not too far from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good comic. They did a good job. I'd like to catch up with it actually.
The writer is Chris Dingus, Matthew Roberts. Oh, and Jenny, and I think former bullpenner Pat Brousseau is the letterer on this, who was before my time. He was a Marvel bullpenner in the 80s. But I'm friends with him on Facebook, so.
He's a really good letterer.
Yeah. Nice. They're killing a lot of the core of Discovery now that you can tell it's getting near the end, because it's like, is anyone going to survive this? And they're just going, they're just reaching, the West Coast. So I don't know how they're going to handle them going back, or if they're going to handle them going back. But I've been enjoying that. That one's been around for a good 5 years now, I think. So I've been enjoying that one. I think that's the first. They said that's the first issue since COVID started. So I think that they may have said it's the first issue in 18 months. So it's been a while.
Yeah,
quite a hiatus there.
Sort of reminds me of Walking Dead.
14 months. This was pretty good too. Now that I open it, there's a preview in the back of a story called Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton. So sometimes they'll give you little previews in the back, which I like. And I'll show you the preview too, some of the artwork. Some pretty decent indie style artwork here. But the side I get, and they're at the funeral of this guy. What is his name? Keaton. And I get Trigger Keaton, and I guess he was a TV star who had a variety of shows, and these were all his kid sidekicks on the TV shows. And they didn't like him very much.
Oh, and Chris Schweitzer's doing the art.
Who's doing
Chris
the art?
Schweitzer's a good guy.
Okay.
Yeah,
the artwork's nice. It's by Kyle Starks and Chris Schweitzer.
Yeah, he did Big Rock Candy or Big Rock. What was it called? Big Rock something. Big Rock Candy, was it? Anyway, it was a really good comic about hobos punching each other.
Oh, look at this. So fortunately, I don't have any interest in spending $7,000 for the first appearance of Blade. The owner sold a copy of the price. Wow, that's what we're talking about when we're saying things are going up in prices and crazy. $7,000 for.
Yeah. I'm not even interested enough in that to pay $7, much less $7,000.
I paid $4 for a facsimile edition of that.
That's a good issue.
That's perfectly a comparison. Yeah.
Tomb of Dracula, that could have been a good artist.
Wow.
Okay,
it's been that long.
You mentioned something way back at the beginning of the show about how whether comics do what they used to. Something about comics and Tomb of Dracula 70s comics that I absolutely loved is it used to be, if you enjoyed life drawing, comics were the only place where you could consistently see solid, well done life drawing on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, cartoony stuff doesn't fulfill that requirement at all. As much as I like cartoony stuff, they're not even trying. So, stuff like Tomb of Dracula, the 70s stuff, the Bissett stuff like that. Even though Bissett was a little bit wonky when he was doing
John Buscema. John Buscema, definitely.
Yeah, Buscema and Kubert were the masters of life drawing.
Gil Kane, Gene Colan,
Frazetta. Oh wait, but you're talking about
Frazetta in comics in the 70s. Neil Adams, boy.
Well, Neil Adams, God.
Black Sod was having a 6th volume in October. Previous came out in 2015. Oh wow, I've never read Black Sod. I keep meaning to.
Black Sod's really good.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think. Do you think? I'm thinking about what you just said about life drawing, and I don't know. You're right. I don't know if there's any life drawing left in terms of that particular, because everything now is photo referenced and computer.
What would you think about some of the comic strips, say like Mary Worth and Mark Trail, things like that?
The old stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know.
70s era.
There was a lot of life drawing there.
Yeah, there was.
The stuff in there's the stuff that Dave Sim is obsessed with, the photo reference stuff in the 50s. There was a lot of life drawing in.
Oh yeah, Williamson type stuff.
But
Gene Colan
right now they're drawn to model the
And for anyone out there, I would say the distinction between comics drawn from life drawing in modern comics is life drawing is about observing the figure. So it's about how our human eyes see the figure.
Mm-hmm.
And even photo referenced stuff has a life drawing background. Like Al Williamson used a lot of photo reference, but it was drawn like a life drawing.
Yeah.
Nowadays, with drawings are drawn like a 3D model or how the camera sees.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the drawing doesn't have anything to do with life drawing anymore. It has to do with everything is seen through a lens.
Yeah.
Or a 3D model.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never thought about that before, really, but I think you're right there. There isn't much life drawing left in,
and you really
comics.
lose the immediacy there. You
Yeah.
know, even people I know who are fantastic artists, like Dave Marquez is a fantastic artist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he's working from photos most of the time, especially during COVID. How could you life draw during COVID?
Right.
You know?
And all those old cartoonists, and they all learned from Hal Foster,
Mm-hmm.
and those cartoonists of that era had live models because they were that rich.
You can recognize Gene Colan's models after a while. Like you can tell which model he's using for which particular
even if they were drawing from photographs, life drawing is their background. They were not trying to make them look like photographs.
Yeah, and there was a level of communication because they were doing have you heard this meme made the rounds recently about in Michelangelo's David, there's a muscle right here on the front of your arm that only it's Moses coming down from the tablet, but this muscle right here only flexes when you move your pinky. You can't see it on my arm because I'm a normal human being with like a layer of flesh between myself and my muscles. but Michelangelo went in and actually delineated that particular muscle.
Huh.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's sort of cartooning, and you can tell you have this. Hi, mister. So much for my speech. Hello. How you doing? This is Arthur. He's very good.
Hi, Arthur.
Hello. No. All right, I'll be right back. Whoa!
Because when you do life drawing, you draw the bones. That's how you start. Sometimes you just draw where the skeleton is. And
I can see this with certain illustrators too, not just comic book artists. You can tell sometimes who knows how things are constructed and how they move,
right?
And other ones just draw it because they think it looks cool,
right? And that doesn't mean the stuff they do now is bad. It's
It's a different
because they can really. I mean, there's a lot of cartoonists these days working from 3D models and photos who can get surface detail, and then they get a good figure, and they get that's just crazy. Yeah. But it's different than life drawing. Interesting.
Let's go, mister.
I just got the thought. I hope Graham Ingles never did life drawing.
What was that?
I just got the feeling that I had a thought that I hope that Graham Ingles never did life drawing.
You never know. Because some people who did life drawing, like Picasso, the most famous case, of course, is he could draw life drawing like nobody's business. But then as he said, he spent the first 20 years learning how to draw, and then the next 20 learning how to unlearn what he learned and to draw like a child again. So there's guys who can do there's guys who you could never expect could do life drawing, could do it, but that's just not what they're interested in. Yeah. And here's my copy of Bitterroot 13, which I think has a printing error on it. It's so funny because if you look at the cover, it's got this line, over here, a dark line kind of going down, like a dark area.
Yeah,
that looks like a printer error or a roller error or something. But I'm not sure. With so many weird special effects in comics these days, I'm like, is that an error or is that not an error? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that definitely does look like a printing error.
Here's a good question. Do life drawings go out with the image error? I think so, because I think all those guys learned to draw from comic book artists. They learned to draw a lot I think that's when it did go. And one of the things we always like Jeff has said about Rob Liefeld, one of the best things about Rob Liefeld when you were a kid was you could draw like that. You understood it.
Yeah. I've always felt like the end of the shooter, beginning of the image era is the time when comics stopped eating their peas and potatoes and just started living on, sugar and heroin. And it lasted for a while. but it really felt like all the fundamentals went away.
Yeah.
Jim Lee was a... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, Jim Lee was a med student, but I don't think he ever learned any anatomical drawings.
even Jim Lee's anatomy is a lot closer to realistic than most of the other image artists.
Sure, but you can tell that he's a John Byrne clone.
Yeah. I mean, and now, I don't think what Scioli's doing is, does Scioli go to life drawing classes, or does Scioli draw old issues of Marvel Universe?
I don't think Scioli goes to life drawing classes.
I mean, the only Tom Scioli I've ever seen is just a very little bit of it. Looks like he's very
Sleepy reader likes your sugar and heroin. But here's an interesting thing. Here's an interesting thing about the Image and Marvel Image era that I didn't notice until maybe 10 years ago, because I started collecting Savage Dragon at about issue 70. So then maybe 10 years ago, I went back and bought issues 1 through 70 off eBay for dirt cheap. From some poor guy who was sick. It made me feel bad after I got the comics. The comics that came with a note from the guy's wife saying, "Thank you for buying these comics. My husband's sick and has to sell his comics." And And I'm like, oh man, I wish I paid more for them now.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
but anyway, I went back and read all the early issues of Savage Dragon 1 through 70 back when he at about issue 70 he really let his Jack Kirby fly after that. But it made me realize that I'd never noticed before. Those Image guys were using a completely different storytelling style than the people before them and now the people after them too. And I kind of, it was just weird to me at the time, and I didn't have a name for it or anything. But and something Mark Teixeira told me back in those days when I was talking. He used to hang out in the Marvel bullpen all the time and work. Made me realize it too later on was the storytelling. Their entire storytelling hinged around pinup shots. Yeah. So it was like. Yeah. The story hung on these pinup shots. Everything before was built on that pinup shot, and everything after was built off of that pinup shot. And you'd have a few pinup shots in the book, and the whole storytelling style rotated around these pinup shots. And it was funny how 20 years later, when I was reading those Savage Dragons, I could actually see it, but I couldn't see it at the time. It was just the storytelling being interrupted by these pinups at the time. Going back and look at him now, I could see how they were constructing things differently. And Tex I can remember Tex working one time, and he said something like, I always like to give him one shot on a page that'll sell the original art. So he'd have a big figure on the page or something like that, and that was their storytelling style too. The stories hung on these pinups. That's what made their storytelling style exciting. They'd have this go on, this go on, this go on, big pinup. This go on, this go on, this go on. But the pinups were also self-conscious. They weren't like and I'm pretty sure they took that storytelling style from Jack Kirby, but the difference was. Jack Kirby's pinups were part of the story itself. They weren't. The pinups were part of the story. They were just a splash page for excitement.
They were organic to the story, right?
Their pinups were their story existed to literally show this pinup. To them, that was the best part. That the whole to like Kirby's, because they were all Kirby fans too. So it's like they took the Jack Kirby storytelling method and did something different and new with it that I didn't even notice at the time because they were so self-consciously pinups. And I noticed this book right here, Bitter Root, is one of the only few I've noticed that's doing that same sort of thing. I noticed because they've got a lot in this particular issue. They've got a lot of full page stuff. This is more Kirby-esque than it's maybe halfway between the Kirby and the Image guys. But look at these pages are just like giant double page spreads full of action. So I thought about that again this week as I was reading this because you don't see that Image style, pinup style anymore.
Yeah. Well, who would take a comic home to tear pages out of it and put it on their wall? That just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. They loved the pinup style so much. They built their entire book around those Cable standing there with a gun looking cool.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that came from a culture of growing up where all your influences were just comic books and you weren't exposed to other things.
I think that's it. Well, I think that's where their drawing style comes from too. Because like I said, the generation before them, the like 50s and 60s generation, grew up idealizing how first was like the first generation influenced comics was kind of the Hal Foster generation.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the comic strip guys who were making so much money making comic strips that they had live models. So they were really into figure drawing.
Yeah.
And then the comic book guys, the first generation of comic book guys, were all influenced by them, but they didn't have the time or money to do all that photo referencing. But they still, and I think the generation after that, the 50s and 60s guys, studied both of those generations.
Yeah.
And by the time the 70s roll around, most of those generation was gone, and like all the 90s generation of artists grew up reading. Their influence was comic books,
right?
In anime, because one of the things that they did in anime in the 80s was the expositional pinup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they would stand around explaining something, but looking cool while doing it.
Well, Kirby and Lee always started every issue with a pinup, like usually the first page, right? Is that an expositional pinup?
No,
they start with a splash page.
No, the exposition is unrelated to the pinup.
Eric Larson
is a little different in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And the 90s guys, by imitating anime, they were doing the pinup so that they had time to do exposition.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric Larson's style now, I'd say, is closer to classic Kirby.
Yeah,
he does the pinups sort of like classic Kirby did for Impact. Rather than like the 90s, they did the pinups because that was the coolest part of the comic that they loved.
Michael Turner in the first issues of Witchblade has some very cool art bits, which are surrounded by expositional text.
And I have to say, that Sleepy Reader showed a comic this week. I forget which one it is. That there's an expositional pinup style now that's some of the most boring stuff you'll ever see. Because I can't remember which issue Sleepy Reader was showing on his video, one of his videos this week, but he was complaining about the exposition, and to me, I was like, oh, there's the explanation, because it's usually like a little figure down the bottom, and sort of a landscape or space or something, and then a bunch of exposition, and it's like, oh, come on, you're wasting a full page on that, but they do it like that's an expositional pinup nowadays, except they don't make it cool.
Well, exactly.
I would say Herb Trimpe was one of the early people to get. He was told to imitate Kirby so much. I think that that was his life drawing Kirby.
Well, as long as we're putting people down, like Trimpe wasn't good, right?
I'm not putting him down for not being life drawing. Okay,
no, I mean, he showed up for work.
That right there.
He showed up for work and he worked on good projects and he turned in legible work. He did the minimum for sure, but he wasn't good. Like, do you think if somebody sold a book of his life drawings, it would be good?
He was not my favorite. I was a Sal Buscema guy, but now when I go back and read those old, go back and read those old Herb Trimpe Hulks, they're better than I remember.
They're good storytelling. Like he was divided by what he was doing.
They're really good, and Trimpe was also good at covers.
Well, he did the early GI Joes, and I mean, like what a kid wants is to be able to tell what's going on and have a lot going on, right? But like it was just.
And it was the Immortal Hulk one shot had that dull exposition. Okay, yeah, I saw, and also the Immortal. I was making fun of that Immortal Hulk cover on Sleepy Readers in his comment section. I was also making fun of it in the comic shop the week before because the cover is the picture of a Hulk standing in front of a door that's too small for him, and I'm just like, oh my god. What's going to happen? Will he fit through the door? Holy cow. I don't know. I've got to know what's going to happen.
It's like in Ed Wood. In real life, you would face that problem every day.
But talking about that, you can have that exact same situation happen in Concrete by Paul Chadwick.
Uh-huh.
You would be interested in what happened.
Yeah, he would manage to get a sense of humor out of it.
Yeah.
You know what won me over for Trimpe? Like I said, I wasn't a Herb Trimpe fan as a kid at all.
Yeah,
I was a Sal Buscema. I started buying the Hulk just as Sal Buscema took it over. My back issues that I managed to get were Herb Trimpe. What won me over as an adult, I discovered the Western covers he did in the early 70s when he inked himself. He did some really nice covers in the early 70s for the Western magazines. And his Hulk covers are pretty nice too, depending on who, inking himself, who's inking him, and stuff like that. I really enjoy going back and looking at his old Hulk covers from the 70s. And I think it was the Jarella story but Harlan Ellison worked on too. That was about 10 years ago. They came out with one of those hardcover books that I got, and I hadn't read that since I was a kid. And I was like, "Wow, these are really good." He did a nice job. They in the 70s they did a nice job with that childish Hulk thing. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it.
It sort of had to tie in with the show.
Yeah, no, this is before the
show. Sorry, I got coronavirus.
Uh-oh. That was when coronavirus started. Every time my sister's family, every time one of them would sneeze, they'd sneeze and go, "Not corona."
Yeah, I'm gonna have fun with it. I mean, I go back and forth on Trimpe because, like, he did stuff that was despised at the time and is remembered well because we loved it, like Godzilla and G.I. Joe and a million. Like he worked on
Shogun Warriors.
Yeah. He did the first appearance of Wolverine.
See, I was buying all that stuff in the late 70s, and it was all mediocre.
Yeah, exactly. He was what I actually hated about comics.
70s comics.
I hate to say that about him because I hear he was a nice guy. I very rarely miss meeting him, but
I've grown to like Trimpe a lot more, but I can't grow to like that Godzilla comic or the Shogun Warriors that much.
I liked Shogun Warriors back in the day, but then I was 12 when that came out, something like that, maybe less than that.
I look at it
quote back up that Gus put up to there.
What was that?
Can you just bring that quote back up that Gus was talking about Hal Foster there? I wonder if Gus is talking about when he says publicist and propaganda. I wonder if he's talking about the artists that worked on the public works posters and things like travel posters in that regard.
Yeah.
I love that kind of art style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And some of the World War II propaganda was interesting art.
Yeah, Soviet realist stuff.
Yeah. I think Trimpe was great for kids too, in his stuff. That Hulk stuff is really.
Well, I loved it when I was a kid, so it's wrong to put it down. But yeah.
Well, see, I didn't love his Hulk as a kid because I was a Sal Buscema guy. But I was okay with it. You know, but like I said, he was doing like, and I was buying because back, in the late '70s when you were a kid, you could Trimpe was better in the early. He also got to ink himself in the early '70s, and had John Severin and Marie Severin as inkers in the early '70s. That's some pretty good. I don't know who inked him I can't remember who inked him on the Shogun Warriors and Godzilla, but I don't think it was the same sort of stuff as.
It looks messy.
Let's find out.
I'm looking at it now, and it looks. And yeah, you're right. Like the Western stuff and the Outlaw Kid is good. It's good stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's the sort of thing that like Roy Lichtenstein would have made a fortune off of.
Right.
Oh, God, don't get me started on Lichtenstein.
Don't get Scott started. That's your rule, okay?
We have one rule on this show.
Oh.
And the next comic I got this week, my pull list falling off a cliff. This is Ha Ha issue 5 of 6. And this one was another. This one wasn't quite horror. Who's doing it? Once again, the writer is W. Maxwell Prince. The art this issue is by Gabriel Hernandez Walta. And it's got sort of this. Let me show you the style. It's sort of pen and ink pen and watercolor style.
Yeah.
And each issue kind of just as I'm showing here, kind of reminded me a little of Guy Davis.
I think it's a crying shame that Guy Davis isn't working in comics anymore.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah,
that's a shame. Yeah, Guy Davis
been for a while.
I don't know if I'd really call this a horror story, but it was good. It was a story about the kid. The crazy old lady in the neighborhood is this ex-clown who still wears her makeup out, I guess. And the kids dare each other to go steal something from her house. So it's one of those type of stories. Well done. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I don't know if I'd call it horror. It's closer to the mystery tales of DC in the 1970s than it is to horror. House of Mystery and House of Secrets. It's closer to that than it is like last issue. Or no, the issue of Silver Coin that was about slasher movies, summer camp slasher movies. But really good. I've been enjoying this series. Ha Ha. I don't know if Ha Ha is hot like if Ha Ha is hot like Ice Cream Man has been.
Ha Ha Ha.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to look for sales figures these days.
Yeah. You look at comicron.com, but I see what's hot by what people are buying on YouTube too. That they occasionally tell. Yeah, Barry Windsor Smith turned him into a modern popular artist by drawing everything right over him. Mm-hmm. Right, I'm going to take this one down so as not to get Scott started.
It's the truth, though.
Yeah, right. That he loved this. Ha Ha. Yeah, I can't say what kind of story it is either, but I'm okay with that. I mean, I know I'm just worried that because I love slice of life is my genre. I love slice of life stuff, but I know most people don't, and I think most people who signed up for Ha Ha want horror.
To me, it just depends on whose life it is.
Yeah.
Mr. Naturally more interesting than others.
Yeah, but if I see an old lady dressed like a clown, I expect corpses. Nice.
To answer your earlier question, Jeff, it was Al Milgram that was inking Herb Trimpe on that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's not. He's not one of the top flight guys. He's solid, but not spectacular.
Well,
I've never read any slice of life manga. I'm gonna have to track some down.
Oh, there's a bunch of it. Yeah, there's an entire genre of manga that's just people walking around. Like
there's
every
of it in my local novel.
I read this one comic, this one manga that was like it was phone book thick, and it was just some dudes on a fantasy subway like looking at the stuff go by outside. I dream of living in a country with an industry like that.
You mean Belgium?
Yeah, well, I wish. I mean, Belgium loves comics and they take it seriously, but they want something to happen. You know, like
True. Yeah.
Walking comics. If you
can do 2 albums a year, you
Yeah.
can make a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on moving to one of the grown-up countries. I'm getting there.
Japan has so many comics; they can dedicate comics to doing nothing.
Yeah, there's a comic about just walking from one comic to another comic. That's how
It's
much
the
comics.
Seinfeld of comics.
Jared, did Prince finish King of Nowhere from Boom? I don't know that one.
Mm.
I don't know that one at all, so I don't. I liked that one. Yeah, I don't remember that one. King of Nowhere. And is that Prince the musician or another Prince?
No.
Oh, that W. Maxwell Prince. Pardon me. I didn't know he did something. King of Nowhere. I only started buying Ice Cream Man with like issue 18, so that's why I picked. So I'm new to Prince. King of Nowhere did wrap up. Sleepy Reader tells us. Okay. Yeah, The Walking Man by. Okay. Gucci. There's another slice of life one. 5-issue mini was King of Nowhere. I don't think I got that one. I'm picturing a cover with a King of Nowhere logo on it, so I may have seen the ad. That's weird. So many comics
can jog your memory.
What was that?
It's funny how ads can jog your memory.
Yeah, but it might also be because in one of my Facebook group, someone just mentioned, what is it? Kings of Disguise, Denizens of Deep City. That's the one. Which made me remember Kings in Disguise, which was, I think, another 80s indie book.
Yeah.
Which made me, so everything's blurring together.
I
King of
remember the
Nowhere.
title Kings in Disguise.
Yeah.
Hey, while we're discussing manga, I'm sure you all mentioned this last week, but you heard about Miura dying?
Yeah.
That leaves the comic in a weird place.
Yeah, he kind of worked himself to death.
Yeah, that's.
Wait, which one was he? I remember hearing about a manga.
He did Berserk, which is a really, really, really weird, good manga. It's sort of done in the Totlieben Beset style, or at least I would say so. But yeah,
that's the one I want to track. The Solitary Gourmet. He's mentioned that one too. I have to track it down. A lot of these Japanese slice of life comics, because, like I said, that's a genre I've always enjoyed.
Yeah, Taniguchi is one of the few. Taniguchi is one of the few manga artists that I'm actually interested in reading.
Yeah,
I read Hikaru no Go, which was a manga about a young man who rises to the top of competitive Go, and it was exactly as exciting as Dragon Ball Z. There were motion lines everywhere, and he was always screaming "hi" as he slapped down like a little white rock, and then somebody else put down a black rock. And they really just like gussied it up as much as they possibly could. It was hilarious.
Huh. And the new Cerebus in Hell is Baby Yoda Cerebus. and Baby Yoda must be popular because this one's got a print run of 3,243, which is about 1,000 more than last issue and like 1,500 more than average. But I have to say, my humor is so lowbrow. He was doing a lot of Baby Cerebus jokes in here, which I was just like, I could take or leave most of them. But every time he did a Baby Cerebus pooping joke, I laughed out loud. So this one is just like Baby Cerebus sitting there, and then poop in the last panel. Like every Baby Cerebus pooping joke got me.
Yeah.
I'm like, I must be an easy mark for pooping jokes.
And every single issue comes with the judgment of Dave Sim.
Whether you want it or not.
You laugh at my jokes, swine.
You really need some knowledge of Japanese culinary. It's really hard to enjoy. That's the Solitary Gourmet.
So he's thinking about Japanese gourmet and talking about culinary stuff. Can you imagine having a slice of life comic and somebody goes in to a Japanese restaurant, Asian restaurant, whatever country, and all of a sudden they're eating live octopus, live squid, and it's like all of a sudden Basil Wolfden just takes over the story.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
By the way, I think I'm the only person buying this. I don't see anyone else. Even Pope Cerebus, that's his YouTube handle, is named after Cerebus. He shows these every now and then, but I'm like, I think I'm the only one buying it.
Maybe to change his name to Poop Cerebus.
Nah. Poop.
Yeah, Dave Sim reached my quota of attention for him, I suppose, a long time ago. It's like nothing against the guy, I just don't really care what he thinks.
I enjoy Cerebus and Hell. They're just comic strips with wacky covers.
Oh yeah, I'm not offended by him. I just don't care. Like once Gerhard stopped, it turns out that it was Gerhard that I really like. Wow, the sun is right on me there. I love Gerhard because I love good life drawing and good background drawing, and he was a background genius. And then when he stopped working with Dave Sim, so when he stopped working with Dave Sim, I was like, okay, I don't know how many caricatures of Oscar Wilde I need to see, but it's not more than like 9 or 10.
Gerhard worked all the way through.
I thought Gerhard left Dave Sim a long time ago.
No, when Cerebus ended, which was a long time ago.
Yeah,
Cerebus was still working with him all the way to the end of it. I mean, when did Cerebus end? That was like 2003 or something, right?
Yeah, it was supposed to end in 2000.
Wow, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
March 2004. Yeah, I suppose it was.
Wow. But I continue issue by issue buying Spawn by Todd McFarlane just because it's the only $3 comic out there. This issue, I think Jeff wasn't here for the last issue of Spawn, where I was making, after 300 issues, you think Todd McFarlane would stop making basic writing errors.
No.
Like, when your English teacher in the 8th grade tells you not to use the same word 2 sentences in a row? Mm-hmm. He did that twice last issue. And then this issue I've been enjoying it. I'm not going to tell you it's bad, but sometimes the writing just makes me shake my head. And this was an issue that made me shake my head because I bought the Eric Larson Todd McFarlane Spawn issues, and they were good. And before that, the only time I'd tried Spawn in the last 25 years, it was unreadable. Mostly because, the writing was unreadable, and the artwork was unreadable. Now, I've started picking it up lately because the artwork is pretty good. But the writing is still... Like, this one was a... almost all set up, because there's been, like, all sorts of action the last 5 issues that I've bought. Then this issue, like, all the action stopped and they just started talking about stuff. Because next month is the big Spawn, what is it called? Spawn Universe book is coming. There's now going to be 4 Spawn books. There's going to be Spawn Universe, Spawn this, Medieval Spawn, and one other Spawn Spotlight or something. So he's actually expanding to 4 books a month. But this, once again, just like last issue, I just skipped this page.
Yeah.
Todd McFarlane is not a good enough writer to make me read that. So,
I discovered that 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right, though. His books are just long excuses for Spawn to jump down from a building.
But, like, there's been lots of action the last few issues. In this issue, we get a nice drawing of Spawn standing there with explanations around him. This is the opposite of that image storytelling, where something exciting, because this is a pinup where those guys were all trying to make those pinups as cool as possible. I don't think they're trying to make
except McFarlane. McFarlane, even in the early days, had a lot of shots of Spawn just hanging around the alley and not doing anything.
But he was trying to make them cool, at least, those shots. All those TV characters that existed since Spawn 1, holy cow.
Yeah, he's dark and moody. He doesn't have time to step out of the shadows.
Right.
Spawn would be a goth if he had a face.
Yeah. Who said that? Was that Mind the Comics? I like the way that comic book artists tend to have like a couple of favorite talking head news reporters, and if you look at any particular artist, because the talking head news reporter, like ever since Frank Miller started doing that in Electro Assassin, like it's a constant, and so it's always fun seeing who picks up the same reporter and just keeps them going for years at a time. Like there was one reporter in the X books who was around forever.
Yeah.
Was Electro Assassin before Dark Knight?
Yes. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but I think so.
No. Electro Assassin was 87, 88.
Okay, so he's been doing it since Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
Were they the same time? Which one came first?
Dark Knight.
Find out.
Are you for real?
Miller went back to Marvel to do Electro Assassin.
Well, God damn it. But Electro Assassin is so much better.
Well, Electro Assassin was originally published in 86.
Yeah.
It started in 86, and Dark Knight Returns was done in 86.
Mm-hmm.
So
there are some people who call 1985 the peak, 1985 and 1986 the peak of comics, and I think they might have a point.
Nah, I don't think so.
Watchmen and Dark Knight at the same time, and there was a bunch of other good stuff coming out. Like Zot was out. I've got to come up with better examples for my thesis here.
Here's a thought that continues here's a thought that continues some of my Dark Knight thoughts that we've been talking about all of forever. Is one week we were talking about Dark Knight, and I was saying something like I'm not Dark Knight, Watchmen, pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying something like one of the reasons Watchmen is beloved is because it's a critique of superheroes, except it doesn't make fun of them in a way. It's a critique of superheroes that's not a parody.
Yeah.
And I said something about it had been done before, but most of the superhero Sleepy Reader said something like Dark Knight Watchmen travels the well-worn path of if superheroes were real, they'd probably be assholes. And I thought that was a decent sum up of Watchmen. But I think the path was well-worn because of parody. I think most critiques of superheroes that said if superheroes were real, they'd be assholes were parody.
Mm-hmm.
Watchmen wasn't parody, which is why it's beloved. But that got me to thinking just recently was what would be the first what would I think is the first step towards Watchmen, the first comic that I could say that led to Watchmen? Mad Magazine's Super Duper Man.
That was Wally Wood. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think I'm going to have to read it, but I think if we think about Watchmen being exploring the wealth, the not new idea that if superheroes were real, they'd probably be assholes, and my idea of that theme was probably explored a lot more in parody than in a serious book like The Watchmen. Then Super Duper Man from Mad Magazine might be the first one. And that there might be a direct line between Super Duper Man and Watchmen.
Would it be a stretch?
Parodies of other comic figures back at the time, like he did Prince Violent.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just limited to superhero comics, but he was. It would be interesting to do a deep dive and do research and figure out.
But we're talking just specifically
what was the genesis of influences.
Like that got me to thinking.
Tracing the influences of Watchmen is going to be like really hard. If there's anybody who you can plausibly say has read every single comic book that came out before Watchmen, it was Alan Moore. Like, if you just read everything,
But I was thinking Super Duper Man might be the first one, in terms of not in terms of superhero stories in the Watchmen, because the Watchmen has always then you'd have to say the owl ship goes back to the Batmobile. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the idea that if superheroes were real, they'd probably be assholes. Which was from when that idea originated to the Watchmen. How did we get there?
Would it be a stretch to connect Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex to Watchmen?
No, that would be in there too. I don't think that'd be a stretch. I think that would be somewhere in there.
I don't think they're directly related to each other, but they're kind of brothers in spirit.
Yeah, they're sort of in that same mold.
Yeah.
I got an old person twitching my neck there. Sorry about that.
And if nobody's ever read that essay, it's really funny.
It's funny as hell. Well, I was 14 when I read it. I thought it was
That's
hilarious.
a good age to read it.
Yeah. It turns out it came out in 1969. I just looked it up. Larry Niven's been around for a minute.
Yeah, he's been around a while.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was like it's obvious from certain parts of Watchmen that Alan Moore put a lot of thought into the sex lives of superheroes. So yeah, I mean,
but I also think the reason Watchmen is beloved is because it's not parody, and it could be seen because I can remember him making what's his name, the Batman guy, Owlman.
Yeah, Owlman.
Oh, the character.
Owlman. Him making Owlman impotent, to me at the time, was bordered on parody. When I was first reading that as it came out, I was like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, Watchmen really is sort of childish sometimes. Not just there, but like with it's really ham-handed sometimes. But as it turns out,
it's not parody at all. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Even though that part may have struck me at the time, and maybe you can make an argument, it's not really.
No, it's the first major deconstructionist work.
Well, major.
See, I don't even know. That's just my idea. Is it's been deconstructed all along in parody.
Mm-hmm.
Watchmen is the first one to do it. That's not parody.
He's also the first one to do it in that degree as well. I mean, he goes deep in some,
Well, in terms of it being a 12-issue series, yes.
Right.
Yeah,
parodies are generally short.
We give all the credit to Moore, but Dave Gibbons was, I think, more than half of that book.
Oh, Dave Gibbons was that book to me.
Yeah, he turned it in. I mean, it's like
Dave Gibbons is the only reason I can look at that book today. I mean, I don't want to read. Matter of fact, last time I read it was last year, right before COVID. I took the Absolute edition out of the library just so I could look at it, and because I couldn't read, I can't read it. I just don't find it entertaining. It's like my 12th favorite Alan Moore book. Forget one of the best comics ever. It's not even in my top 10 of Alan Moore comics.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy. I mean, every time I just kept it next to my chair. Every time I would pick it up, I would just get so absorbed into the artwork, into flipping through it. I'd read certain little parts of it because the artwork would demand it of me, but I couldn't, read the whole. But man, is it nice! I think Dave Gibbons' writing in it is genius.
Yeah, he's really, really quite good at what he does.
Yeah. Hold on, my computer isn't plugged in. It's going to shut down in 39%.
Yeah, we don't deserve Dave Gibbons. I don't know why English comics are so good, but I guess they pay more for them.
There's several creators we don't deserve, and we don't really give them, the due that they're due.
Though it's not mentioned a lot, I'd rather read Dave Gibbons' The Originals than the Watchmen. I love the originals. It's not the. It's not.
You know what you're reminding me of right now? I'm such a fan of the band. I am such a fan of the band, the Violent Femmes, that I could make a best of Violent Femmes albums that doesn't have one single song off the first album. That's how much I love them. So I get it, but I got to say, I bought Watchmen again a couple of years ago to read it again with the HBO series, and it's just really good. I love it. I absolutely love it. But de gustibus non disputatum, anybody who's read Dave Sim knows that like some human beings love the Rolling Stones more than any human being should, and what can you do? You just enjoy their work for what it is.
Yep.
It's like I've been thinking a lot about the movie Fight Club, which to me is one of the greatest films of all time. Like most people don't agree with me on that, though.
I still haven't watched that a second time. I've always meant to.
I liked it okay until I'm not going to ruin it for anybody that hasn't seen the movie, but there's a
reveal.
Oh yeah, when they find out that Rosebud is the name of his sled, and then Bruce Willis was dead the whole time. Yeah, absolutely.
No, stop that.
You troublemaker.
At least I didn't spoil The Mandalorian. I think there's a time limit on spoilers. Like if the movie or the work is old enough to vote, you can go ahead and fuck it up. But we're not here to talk about Fight Club. And the comic Fight Club, by the way,
if there's been a comic book sequel,
there are, and they're not good. Yeah,
then
there's lots of comics.
The spoiler period is over because there's never a comic book sequel.
No, they made a whole Fight Club comic. For a while, and it wasn't great.
Whatever his last name is, I can't remember. He actually wrote it, didn't he?
Yeah, Polania. Yeah. It was called. It's called Fight Club. It's totally canon. It's not good.
I tried reading it. I couldn't make it.
Yeah. I will always cheerfully get rid of somebody else's canon and replace it with my own. Like, okay, for example, back to comics. Like, I have this theory now that everything that Alfred ever says to Batman is perfectly serious. And he's never even being slightly sarcastic. And when he says stuff like, you're forgetting your bat thermos, that's because the branding is important to him, and he wants Batman to have the bat thermos with the bat on it. Yes.
But if you do the exact opposite and think that everything that Alfred said was sarcastic, that's a whole different story. You know?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I don't know if you had kids, but when you were a kid, if your parents, God help them, had died when you were 12 years old, in a horrible, violent crime, what are the odds that your butler would have gotten custody of you?
No.
Fairly low.
The corporation got custody of him. The butler worked for the corporation.
Oh, that makes it okay. Anyway, so like this guy grows up to be a violent leather-clad loner who is really into bats. And my theory is, like the English word for a butler is a Batman, right? And yeah. So this is my fan theory, and it's better than the reality. I don't care if reality is right. This is my theory. It's better. Alfred's the one who's really into it. Like the whole time. He has no idea that any of this is funny.
In the Gotham TV series, Alfred was crazier than young Bruce. That was for sure.
Yeah. So this is my roundabout way of saying that actually Fight Club 2 is the G.I. Joe comics and Tyler Durden is Cobra Commander. And I don't care if Chuck Palahniuk contradicts me.
Wow.
I don't know what any of that meant.
That's an interesting analogy.
Oh, man. Anyway, so you had an actual comic book to show, Jared? I'm sorry.
Meanwhile, speaking of me not understanding, Monstrous has been on fire lately. Really enjoyed this issue. But it's now into high fantasy stuff that's going. You know what? As much as I enjoy Monstrous, I don't like fantasy writing, and fantasy fans are really into the comings and goings and the workings of a fantasy universe. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not.
There's also subgenres of fantasy as well. And it's like golf. People are either really, really hardcore into it, or they don't care for it at all. There's no middle ground there.
Yeah, the creators got to totally commit too.
I've been really enjoying this book, and I really enjoyed this issue, but this was one of those issues where I was like, you know what? I bet a fan who's really into fantasy liked this issue more than I did, because there was like big fights going on and some explanations of the canon of what was going on, and I just like skimmed the surface of that stuff. I just understand it enough to follow the story.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wow, I bet if I was really into this, I'd like. What was that?
You would absolutely hate Tolkien then.
No, I liked Tolkien. I liked Tolkien when I was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I couldn't make it through the Silmarillion. So.
That's what I was just getting ready to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to learn Elvish I got on Duolingo, actually, and I started learning Elvish, and then I was like, I don't like the Silmarillion. This is not a good use of my time.
There's also dialects of Elvish.
Yeah. I also just want to point out that somebody in the comments doesn't have a butler.
No, the US wouldn't have had a butler.
Weird. Well, who's going to raise your kids if you die? This doesn't make any sense.
Your elderly aunt, your elderly aunt and uncle.
Yeah, there you go. Well, he's not going to get too elderly.
Just become a professional wrestler, and you'll be okay.
And the last comic I got of the week is once again, I'm too old to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan, really, but I've been enjoying this Last Ronin story, which is Golden Age comic size. And see, I don't know if I believe any of the stories they say about this. This was from a script or idea that Eastman and Laird had in the 80s about the end of the Turtles and the last one to live. And so that's what this is about. The Foot Clan rose up and killed 3 of the Turtles, and only one of them's left. And there's this last stand in New York City in the future against the Foot Clan, which I have a hard time taking that name seriously, just because I know it's a parody of The Hand. But yet, here we are, 35 years later, still calling them the Foot Clan in a serious manner.
Well, if they were caterpillars instead of turtles, would that give it more oomph?
Maybe. But the art's been good. The story, I've liked it. I've never really read more than a handful of issues of the Turtles, and I picked up the first issue of this on a lark, and I'm enjoying it. It's solid.
They always make good
for its $9 price tag.
Ouch!
Wow. Yeah, the Turtles comics were really good. Well, I never. Hold on just a second. Let me make sure I've got this before I start talking about it. Aha!
Hey, any comic that started a boom has to have some merit.
So I don't plug my own stuff very much, but I got the. I showed these to you earlier, Jared. But this is my new comic, Monomania. It's actually quite old, but we're finally printing it.
It's all shiny. Solo layout so we can see.
There we go. So yeah, it's so shiny that you can't actually see it. I actually have all 4 issues. It's going to be for sale soon, and we have no distribution and nothing to do with it. But God damn, it looks beautiful. I'm just so happy seeing my work in foil.
Did you do those covers?
Yeah, I did all this. I didn't write it. I'm not the
Right.
writer. This is the only thing I've ever done that I wasn't the writer for, which is, why there's so many diaper jokes, to be perfectly honest. But but I stand behind the story, and I had a hell of a good time drawing it. I worked on it for like 3 or 4 years, and they paid me all the way through, and then we got to the end and just could not find distribution. So,
wow,
where the project ends. I suppose we are. I think it's called Monster Closet or whatever Joey's company's called it today. It's a bunch of like people down in Houston who make movies and stuff like that. So,
well, if it's available to the public, let us know when it is and how
I will. I certainly will. And I finished War on Christmas again, so I'm going to have the Kickstarter for that starting up again soon here. Hopefully better than last time.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'll have a bunch of comics out soon. I have been working hard. I just, you work really hard and then you have nothing to show for it.
Yeah, I know that story. But speaking of working hard and having nothing to show for it, here's a story I have for you.
All right.
How's he going to show us if he does nothing to show for?
Which I wrote a blog about once, but I just got the comic to go with it. Now, this story brings us back to X-Men Classic 83, which came out in 1993. Now, here's a weird thing. Back when I'm working in the Marvel bullpen doing production work, usually when you do the production work, you leave no trace. That's the job. That's the way that you don't get. Nowadays, it's like you often, like for indie books and stuff, like on Bad Idea, they put my name in it. And Image Comics puts the production guy's name in it. There's more names out there now. But Marvel and most every place in 1993, you didn't get your name in anything. And one of the things we had to do was, this is when I was working on covers. And what we used to have to do was we get the cover in. And let me show you the cover. Here's the printed cover. of X-Men Classic. And this is just a printout I made from some online stuff. And if we look, it's tall. This up here is taller than this color. And if we look, the circle is right in the middle of the logo here. If we look up here, the circle is way higher. And what happened was, this is a Joe Madureira, Dan Panosian cover. Joe Madureira, he was young then too. He was just starting in '93. He didn't leave enough room for the logo. So when that happens, we have to decide what we're going to do. And this one was easy enough because almost all the way around here is black. So what I do is I take that and I bring it into the stat room and I tell them to stat this down to 90%. Then I fill in the rest of the area with black and do the cover like normal. But usually, matter of fact, is this very tape, this kind of tape here, what we do is, this is just white artist tape because we didn't want to write on the actual board. We put a piece of tape on the bottom of the original art and write 1 at 90%, hand it to Robbie, the stat guy. He'd make a stat of it at 90%, give us the board and the stat back. I'd hand the original art back to the editor and work on the stat and make the cover for printing.
Right.
And then before I gave the original art back, I'd always everybody would. You tear your name off, you take the piece of tape off. This tape you put on, you take off, it doesn't tear anything. So before you give it back, you just take your name off it because they don't need 1 at 90%. So this is like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever I wrote the blog, I'm just tooling around the internet. I don't know what I'm looking at, but that's when I found this. There must have been somebody owned it or somebody sold it. And down at the bottom, I see 190% Jared. Somehow, the piece of tape never got off this one. And I was like, wow, actual evidence that I existed back in 1990.
And you're the only person that would have noticed that.
I'm the only person that would have noticed that.
No, someday the PhD student that studies Jared's life will put all this together.
That makes you more real than Fletcher Hanks.
Exactly. More real than so the funny part was, and I wrote a blog about this, I don't know, 5 years ago. So the funny thing was, I was thinking about adapting that blog for our fanzine we're eventually going to put out. And so I made this printout of it too. It was only like a 72 DPI file I had, so I had to do a lot of Photoshop tricks to even get a halfway decent printout. Then I said to myself, you know what? I don't have a copy of that X-Men Classic '93. Why don't I go on eBay and get a copy? And usually when I do that, like I got that Marvel Visions I showed a few weeks ago, that it usually costs about $10. If you want some random issue on eBay that it's going to cost you like $4 for the issue and $4 shipping. So I was like, all right, I know that's what it's going to cost me. That's no problem. But then I happened to look, and some guy for $20 has a set of 5 of them. And I'm like, who in their right mind, besides me, of course, is going to buy a set of 5 X-Men Classic 83s? So I'm like, I have to get it. Because there's nobody else in the world who needs 5, who in any way wants 5 copies of X-Men Classic 93.
Oh man, you got me thinking now. I should buy the issue of Daredevil that I fucked up.
Yeah, of course.
Oh no, it's $20. It wasn't that good, guys.
Give it a couple weeks and then check the prices again and see if they've gone up after this video.
Yeah.
but like, I couldn't believe that. Like, what eBay seller would say, I got 5 of those. Why don't I package them as one auction? Because somebody for sure wants 5 of them. And how long was that? Because it wasn't an auction. It was just, eBay just has you put stuff up on there and it stays forever. But it's like, how I wonder how long these were. Did I happen to look on the first week these were up? Or have they been there for 3 years before some lunatic said, I need 5 copies of that random comic that nobody collects?
Yeah, exactly. Well, someday when you're famous, they'll be like, wait a minute, Jared Osborne did the production design on this. We got to get all of this. We need as many copies as we can get.
We would not be able to read that X-Men Classic logo if it wasn't for Jared.
Yeah.
It'd be completely obliterated.
Lost to history. Gentlemen, excuse me for but a moment. I'll be right back.
So I now have 5 copies of X-Men Classic 83 for no particular reason.
There you go.
Besides, I wanted 1 copy of it.
Yeah. You should get that blown up as a giant poster size.
As a what?
You should get that blown up like 24 by 36 as a poster.
Mm-hmm.
X-Men. He does that annoying. I was never a fan of that yellow outline around rather than making black meet black thing.
They didn't want to do that at the time. I don't know.
Matrix
Might have had something to do with printing quality.
No, that just had to do with. I was told. Well, what did it? He was young too. A lot of artists don't know how to make black meet black properly. They lose their black shapes when they make so they put an outline around it. And I was also told, I remember being told at this time, a lot of inkers did that because they wanted you to see their line. I was never a fan of it. But especially young artists, they don't know how. There's a lot of black in this form over here.
Yeah,
they don't know how to do that and make it meet black. All the old pros know how to do that in a second.
Yeah, I think I remember some Punisher issues with some fill-in artists doing the same thing around the time. Yeah. But I think I remember Simonson doing it.
Yeah, Simonson did it matter of fact, I don't know who it was on Facebook was complaining about something similar, and Walt chimed in. It was like, "Hey, I hope you don't hate me. I do that every now and then." I mean, you can do it right. I mean, it doesn't fail every time.
Right, because in Walt it kind of highlighted the characters, right? But everyone else, you can see that they just don't want to have the background the figures.
Some guys might put it over in the one side where there's the black rather than all around everything. Mm-hmm. You don't need it over here on this green. They'd leave Walt would leave that out.
It would depend on the art style too. Like I can see somebody like Bill Sienkiewicz doing that, and it would look fine.
Yeah.
Another artist, it would look terrible. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. That is true, but that always this is a. My God, how old was he in 19? He must have been 18 when he drew this cover.
Around that, 17 or 18. He did his first job was that Marvel Comics Presents with North Star, and I think he was 16.
He was a 16-year-old intern at Marvel. He used to sit next to me. And somehow he caught Bob Harris's eye with his work. And I can remember him talking to us. He was trying to decide whether he should go to college or try to be a comic book artist right now. We were like, go to college. Because the odds that you become a comic book artist right now are slim to none. But for some reason, Bob Harris took a shine to him.
Yeah. And
that is... out of all the interns and young artists I saw trying to get work, trying to do the same thing in the 15 years I was there, he was the only one. So it's like, I don't know. I was like, it's so weird. I don't know why that happened or how it happened. But it was kind of crazy. Yeah, he was a 16-year-old intern, and Bob Harris was like, I like your work. And he's good for a 16-year-old. Yeah, right time, right. Who knows what it was, but that was kind of crazy. Dr. Spectrum should have a vaporware art house film about him. And his power. Oh no.
That was a good moment to re-enter on.
Who wrote this comic? Oh no, this is a reprint of like one of the 190s X-Men. Yeah, you can Joe Mad had that style that stood out on the racks at the time. Yeah, he was one of the first guys influenced by Japanese animation and stuff.
Yeah. He actually reminds me of Todd McFarlane a lot. Really cartoony.
Yeah.
But in a good way.
That's what I call the Milton Caniff school of cartoon realism.
Yeah.
As it's called, yeah. But here's another. I was just telling this story to Kyle Bowlers, who used to work with us at Marvel and now is working at Bad Idea. Forgotten history of Marvel Comics. The reason Marvel doesn't have volume numbers on their comics anymore is because Dan Carr got a promotion. It is amazing how like little thing, because it used to be Marvel always had volume numbers on their comics until the late 90s. And I don't know who did it before Dan, but Dan was the typesetter in the from the early 90s up until the late 90s, which meant anytime this is before the digital age. So anytime an indicia came from legal, Dan would have to get it, set the type on it, and he would always go around and make sure everything was okay because he didn't want to typeset it twice. He would go to the editorial, make sure it had the right number and volume number on it. He would go and if there was a problem, they have to go back to legal and then change it. So Dan would always check to make sure it had the right volume number. Eventually, right as Dan gets promoted to production manager, the bullpen has started to digitize. So now the indicias now come from legal as digital files that we're not allowed to touch in the bullpen, and there's nobody to make sure they're correct. And so and keep in mind, whoever was in the legal department doing the indicias, that was entry level job. And if you didn't want to be doing indicias if you're working for legal at Marvel, they probably gave it off to some intern who even knows who did them. But that was not a high level job, so they did not care. So eventually, there was nobody to say, what's the volume on this one? Nobody asked that question, so they just fed the volume. Nobody made the decision not to use volume numbers anymore. It was nobody saying, volume numbers are silly. We don't need to use them. It was just the legal guy said, this is Spider-Man number 3. Spider-Man number 3 it is. And passed it off.
Well, what were the volumes for? I mean, it probably made sense like back in the days of Charlton Comics, but I never figured out why they were.
There were volume for anybody who has to catalog anything. Yeah. You need volume numbers. Legal to catalog something, they need volume numbers. But the person who gave it volume numbers in legal didn't care. They don't care.
Yeah.
So, you will still find guys who there are always people who comic book catalogers who loved the fact that Marvel had volume numbers right in their indicias because DC didn't, and that made DC's books really confusing to find which issue went with which volume. And now all Marvel and DC are like, but that's another thing.
Got confusing. All right, I always wondered.
There's a people, the smallest little thing in comic book history that nobody's like, why Marvel doesn't use volume numbers anymore? Because Dan Carr got promoted.
Do they still have cover dates on the issues that are several months ahead of when they're actually?
I don't even know. I don't think they do. I'm not even sure. I don't buy Marvel. It's like Image stuff certainly doesn't. I don't even know if Marvel and DC do anymore.
Magazines still do.
Yeah. Kaiju Max doesn't have the date on it.
Because magazines are distributed through newsstands
Right.
and they get mailed to million subscribers.
Right.
Marvel doesn't have that anymore.
Oh, that's another way that we.
That's what Marvel also doesn't use R's and TMs on their covers anymore.
And
Because that was part of my job on doing the production on this, is to make sure there's a TM after X-Men Classic. Looks like there's no to make sure there's a TM after Caliban, to make sure there's an R after the stuff that's registered.
Otherwise, it'll be like Night of the Living Dead. You leave off that little magic R, and suddenly, like, Spider-Man's public domain.
Yeah, I guess
knocking on your door.
I guess Disney does not. No, what's weird is, because I noticed this a couple of years ago, none of the Marvel logos on the covers have R's or TMs anymore, but the Lucasfilm stuff still does. I wonder why that is. I guess Lucasfilm insists, even though Disney owns them.
Yeah, I am wondering why that is.
Because Disney obviously does not care. They're like, you think you own Spider-Man because we didn't put an R on there? Come at it.
Well, there's probably different offices that go through and analyze those.
True Believers reprint, no R.
No R, yeah.
Should be here. It isn't.
Yeah, there's even on the reprints they don't have them. No R's or TMs on anything anymore. I noticed that one day. It was like 2 years ago or probably 5 years ago now. In the store, I was explaining to someone about them for some reason, and I picked up some issues to show them the R's and TMs, and they weren't there, and I was like, "What the?" They just don't use them anymore.
Are they in the indicia now?
Oh, the indicia's there.
Right.
The indicia is a copyright notice.
Yeah, the indicia is the copyright notice,
but not a trademark notice.
Okay.
Of course, as long as you actually use it in a product that is for sale, you can claim that it's in use. And since they still have indicia dates, the trademark keeps getting renewed.
That's why you have 4-issue miniseries of something 25 years ago that nobody's thought of since then.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna keep copyright.
Yeah, that's why there's always, a Thing series. We always used to call them Because Our Lawyers Demanded It miniseries.
Captain Marvel.
Of course, if you want to check back in up until the 90s, you didn't know if something was a registered trademark or not. Now you can know. You just go to the U.S. patent website and type a name. It's there.
No, if you're serious about wanting to write for Marvel, the way to do it, I think, is to write a Captain Marvel novel or a Captain Marvel script, a really good one, because they'll have to use it eventually. They need a new Captain Marvel thing every year.
And
nobody gives
they
a
are
shit
not
what
public. They're not public domain.
Yeah, tell the lawyers that you saw.
Tell you differently.
You were watching a podcast, and we said that it's all public domain now.
Disney's lawyer. Well, I know they have techniques now too, where I think it's with is it Tarzan? A lot of the estates like to send out. They like to I think some of Tarzan is in public domain, and if you want to do a public domain Tarzan or whatever, they like to make. They like to make it easier to license Tarzan from them than for you to go on your own and make your own public domain Tarzan.
Yeah.
So they've got lawyers that will hassle you.
Right. Edgar Rice Burroughs was the first writer to, what's the word I'm looking for, to capitalize on his IPs in that regard.
Ah.
He was very smart for doing that. That's how he made millions and millions of dollars.
Wow.
Smart guy.
Probably the first novel adapted to a movie.
One of. Yeah.
Well, it helped to be around at the birth of movies.
Right.
Yeah, but who would have thought, man, this book would make a great movie at a time when movies weren't great.
Yeah, but nobody thinks that not during the birth of movies. It's like, if you were to write a book now, you can't just get a movie made about it. I don't know. Maybe it was hard. Who knows?
But you read the book.
Timing helps.
Yeah.
I can't exactly explain the timing, but timing always helps if you've got good timing.
It's absolutely technology. You know where you can really see this is the works of famous photographers. Like, look through Robert Frank and see anything that isn't just like standard photo student work at this point.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just because he was there first and he took the picture of the reflection in the window first, you know, or the guy looking out the window down on a parade, you know, all that stuff that only has value because he was first. Modern painting has this problem a lot too, where people want something new.
Mm-hmm. Modern. Let's keep it modern.
Yeah. There's technology. You know what squash and stretch is, right?
What is that?
Squash and stretch from animation.
Every time I get out of bed.
Yeah, exactly. Like early animation, you go back and you look at early animation, it's not good, right? It's either like weird Betty Boop type stuff or it's rotoscope stuff that's really obviously rotoscoped. They hadn't invented anything else. They just literally didn't know how to do these goofy Betty Boop animated GIF things or tracing over a pretty girl dancing in a circle. That's all they had.
Well, if you see the early Winsor McCay stuff, it's really good.
Yeah, Winsor McCay. Well, Winsor McCay was a genius even when. But he did that by himself, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, he animated Gertie the dinosaur by himself.
I know. That's why it was so good.
Yeah. He just threw down on that.
Like
okay. Yeah. So, but like they gradually invented this technique called squash and stretch, which is like a bouncing ball or the potato sack. Bloop. And that's how they managed to make animation that inhabited that space between fake rotoscope and completely goofiness. Like, sort of that's where the Disney style came in. Squash and stretch was invented by Disney. And so there's technology in comics. And I mean, we mostly talk about it through coloring and the way that, you know, we started with like the Little Ladies of Windsor, and then we moved to Seps, and then they moved to just like straight up Photoshop. So that's what I'm trying to say is there's a progression. I feel we're on the edge of one in comics and we're just not there yet.
In what regard? I'm just curious.
I think coloring needs to change. I think the way that we color comics isn't quite right. There's just something like I think about this a lot because the color, like true black and true white, don't exist in nature. You know, with the exception of that glowing thing in the sky there.
Right.
But there's really no. And actually, the reason why you're seeing glowing is because there's only like 5 stops of sensitivity on my camera when your actual eye has like 20. There's no black or white in nature, but there is on a comic book page. And really good comic book pages tend to use strong, heavy inks, even though in real life, absolutely nothing is surrounded by an outline. It's a completely synthetic style. And we've been trying to attach computer coloring to this for the longest time now, and have gone through so many fads and so many phases and have not quite managed to hit what people could do with watercolor. We're just not there. Like the lens flare era of comics, the 90s, is an example of technology that passed, right? Like you look at 90s colored work now and you're like, this is clearly the 90s. Everything's gradient. Everything's isolated. Like all forms are like, everything looks like Trencher. Everything's made up of these jigsaw puzzle pieces of outlined areas.
Every muscle had its own individual highlight.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't good. So we've moved away from that, and now we've moved into now we're in like the faux newsprint stage. We're just like, well, at least we should be able to use computers to make things look exactly like old like 60s comics. And they more or less have that. I don't know. If you just found Grand Design, would you say to yourself, this comic was made in the 60s? You would honestly believe this was made in the 60s, right?
If I didn't know anything, I might.
Yeah, there's nothing in there that tips the hand. It's just it's a little bit too consistent, and it's a bleed book. That'd be the only thing that really shows it off at all, is like there's a little bit of a bleed on the top. So we figured out we figured out that we went wrong. We figured out that lens flares are bad. We figured out that an individual point source for every single muscle is a bad idea. And now we're going back to and then we went through that sort of like Hawkeye and Jimmy Corrigan phase of coloring that turned into this really sort of like flat color style that I still like, but isn't that isn't that exciting? And now we're like, well, let's just try to completely recreate the magic of the 60s and see if we can figure out where we went wrong. But there's a technology there. People still haven't figured it out yet.
I think the technology that people figured out is they figured out there's like 12 different color styles now.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one. There used to be like 2 or 3. It used to be the color styles were defined by the technology of printing.
Mm-hmm.
There's still some of that there, but you have so many more choices due to computers. So you can do a watercolor style without watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
Some guys have done that. You can do a completely plastic molded style. You've so many. I don't think there's one dominant style at all. As what there used to be. It used to be closer to one dominant style because of the technology of printing. Now it's there's no one dominant. So you could pick up any comic book, and it could have a radically different style than the next comic book you pick up. I think that's what's different.
Some of my favorite coloring that's going on right now is what David Peterson does in Mouse Guard.
Yeah. It's a naturalistic style, right?
But it's not quite completely flat.
Yeah, I can't picture that. I'd have to. I think I have an issue of Mouse Guard here, but he's got sort of an old-fashioned illustrative style.
Right.
His stuff looks like early 19th century, early 20th century illustrations, or was it one of those?
Worked on a children's novel.
Yeah,
back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he knows how to use his light sources in that regard too. A lot of other artists just don't.
Yeah.
Oh, and computer. You know what's crazy? I just got this new iPad app called Focus, Focos, and it's supposed to be what is that? What is that Japanese word for depth of field? Boken or something like that. Boku. Where you basically make a shallow depth of field, and it turns everything in the background into sort of an abstract pattern. It's built to do that, where it automatically detects the edges of your subject with a pretty 94% success rate, and blurs out the background, makes them into little bow. But one of the things you can do on it too that was just crazy to me, it somehow takes your flat image, translates it into 3D, but it's like you can add light sources. There's a little thing where it's like, here's your flat photograph. It figures out all this stuff, and now all of a sudden you want a light source from down underneath, and it does it.
It's crazy.
It's like, what the?
I just read an article in Science News about how they have a program that can look around the corner of your webcam. Like they can take the computer and they can analyze what's on the walls around the corners of your house, which I assume we all find terrifying.
I saw that in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
If you want something really terrifying, just know that you can shine a laser now on any window, and you can pick up the vibrations and translate them into sound, and you can find out what somebody's saying.
Oh yeah, they've had that since the top secret SI source book from TSR in the 80s. Which, by the way, if you did you ever read that? It was prescient. It was just filled with all sorts of stuff that would become a big deal in the future, like fracking. But anyway, yeah, they've had that for a long time. I have a theory that they can hear what you're saying from the vibrations of the water in your toilet. I mean,
Yeah.
The thing is, if everybody's watching, nobody's paying attention. So it really doesn't matter. That's what I've been rewatching The Sopranos, and one of the best things about that show is just like those people just do whatever the hell they want and nobody cares. And I think that is so realistic. Yeah, just like there's just too much information. They can't keep track of it all.
Too much information.
Yeah. Yeah, they're drowning in it just as much as we are.
Oh no. This actually, I think this X-Men Classic might be. This just reminded me of once again. Tim had a video earlier of the stuff he bought at the local yard sale, or the local flea market he had going on. Did I take one of these out? Doesn't matter. Let's pull another one out. I think, and he got 2 issues of the X-Men, the Kool and Garth issues, which is right around here. X-Men 179. This is, pardon me, a little earlier, but he was showing off the 2 issues he got of the X-Men, which which he says he remembers from his childhood as being everywhere, and I was like, those are the exact 2 issues that made me stop reading the X-Men. And it's always funny when I see it's like, it really matters when you start reading comics.
It's true. Yeah.
Because when you start reading comics, everything's fresh and new. And those are your favorite, even if it's to somebody who's been reading for 10 years, they're old and derivative. To you, they're fresh and new.
Right.
And those were the ones that were so old and derivative to me, I just couldn't take it anymore. But to people who started there, they're great.
I think there's that, and I think there's also like things do have their moments. Like I think one of the reasons why I've spent so much of my life with comics is that at the exact moment that I happened to be really ready to be into something like comics, that's why I was looking around for the best thing I could find. And that just happened to be the moment when comics were really freaking good. And I don't think the comics were good at that moment just because I happened to be that age. I think that I was looking for something that was good, and I grabbed that, and I grabbed on really tight.
You're going to have to tell me what comics they were, because I know there's a lot of people a few years younger than me who the comics they think are really good, I think are god-awful.
No, I was 10 years old in 1985. So I was reading, okay, long story short.
You're the exact age of guys who love the comic, because I stopped reading almost all Marvel and DC comics in right about 1985.
No, it's Marvel comics are why I'm liberal. Like I was sitting on the floor.
I'm not saying they're not why they're why. I'm just saying the comics you probably love from that era, I don't. They're the ones that made me stop reading. But by that point, I had been reading Marvel and comics for a decade.
No, okay, but what I'm saying is, like, I was sitting on the floor of the corner drugstore because I didn't have the money to buy the comic, reading Daredevil Born Again, where and going like, wait a minute, was something wrong with the Vietnam War?
That was a good comic.
Yeah, that was an honest to God good comic that happened to be at the exact moment that I needed it, and stuff like I feel validated in my love of Vision and the Scarlet Witch, for example. I love that.
That's not a good comic.
But it became the show.
The show was very good. I'm shocked that I liked the show because the comics are so not good.
The 1982 miniseries is actually very good.
Vision and Scarlet Witch? No, it's not.
Are you talking about the 86 or the 92?
The 82. The one with Rick Leonardi art. When Magneto reveals is their father.
Yeah. But this
actually revealed that before that. I actually don't even remember it. I remember not liking any of the Scarlet Witch and Vision ones very much. I bought them I didn't even realize one came out as early as 1982.
Yeah, there were 2 series. Leonardi was kicking ass for a while there.
I remember neither one of them impressed me.
The 86 series was drawn by Rich Howell, I think, and he's never been that good.
Yeah, that was the not very good one. If you give me a choice between those two, it's no choice at all.
Yeah, I only love it. I know it's not good.
Maybe the mediocrity of the second series has erased the mediocrity of the first series from my mind.
No, it's like you were talking about, like all company books eventually become Silver Age comics. It's part of the mysterious tension of comics where things go from good writers to bad writers, and the bad writers are a big part of it. And the down cycles, the time when a story is not as good, are important. It's what makes the good story good again. Like you've got the first Vision of the Scarlet Witch series, which was great, and then the second Vision of the Scarlet Witch series, which was not. Sorry.
I believed that for 10 years, but then now for the last 40, I've been buying indie comics, and that doesn't happen. Yeah, I've not kept buying a series when bad writers and bad artists come on it, because that doesn't happen in indie comics.
Yeah. Okay, but if it wasn't for the completely berserk interplay between good writers and bad writers, you never would have had Wanda's hysterical, like, pregnancy going into hysterical children. Like, that's one of the craziest fucking stories of all time. And it never would have happened if it hadn't been for a good writer followed by a bad writer, followed by a good writer who was doing a bad job, followed by a good writer who wanted to prove how great he was.
You are right, but I'm just saying I don't care about that process.
Yeah.
The process I have is I follow creators to whatever comic they're doing.
Yeah.
And I read that until they stop doing it and doing something else. Or if you're, Stan Sakai and you keep doing Usagi Yojimbo for 35 years, I keep buying it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Chris Schweitzer, by the way, is a good person to follow around. And he works with that other guy, Kyle, what's his name, all the time? Kyle Stark? They're always switching stories.
Yeah. Can you think of a book that's been consistently as good as Usagi Yojimbo that long?
No.
I can't.
No.
No, I mean, I like I prefer more what's the word? More collaborated books than Usagi Yojimbo, but I can't think of anything that's been that good. Mm-hmm. Like Cerebus is the only even reasonable competition, right?
Savage Dragon.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Love and Rockets, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of Love and Rockets.
Yeah.
I don't think Love and Rockets has been that. What's the word I'm looking for?
Consistent.
Thank you.
It hasn't come out as consistently as Usagi, I think is what it is. Now I'm interested. Jackio here says he's been reading Marvel since the early. He says, how many Marvel does your Marvel reading ebb and flow, and where is it now? He's sending the same rope over and over.
No, it's curious that you mentioned 10 years. It's curious that you mentioned 10 years when you stopped reading, because it was when I was reading Marvel for 10 years that I thought about stopping.
Yeah.
And I was 16 then.
Right.
I didn't mean to stop. It just happened.
Well, I think that's what happens with most people. I meant to stop, though. Because most people...
What made me not stop was buying back issues. The problem...
Well, I think what happens to people is, especially our age, I don't know about young people today, is when you start out, comics are Marvel and DC comics.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what's available to you. That's what you fall in love with. That's what you like. And that's what comics are. And then what happens is once you've read Marvel comics from the age 8 to 18, they kind of grow disinterested in them, and comics never become anything else to them.
Yeah. See, right when I hit that age, when I was getting bored with Marvel and DC, that's when Vertigo kicked in.
Yeah, well,
okay,
I can see that. He stopped in 77. Yeah.
Never went back. You won't believe what's happened to Gwen Stacy.
I found other indie, like I said, a local comic, or a comic shop a few towns over opened up for me the summer I turned 15, so I could go and get other comics other than Marvel and DC eventually. By the time my end high school years, I had a pull list. I'd go every week. I could find lots of other stuff other than Marvel and DC. But most people don't do that. Most people never find stuff other than Marvel and DC. So they stop reading comics.
Most people are passive in regards to what they look at, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like me, I'm completely opposite. I go out and seek out stuff that I think I'll like.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll spend an hour at the shop before I buy 2 comics. I'm terrible about it.
Yeah, most people only read and listen to what comes by them.
So I remember, like, I got back into buying comics when I was in college, and my roommate Elliot was reading the issue of X-Men, and I was reading Mobius, and I'm like, "Oh, this is different. I like this a hell of a lot better."
Yeah, I like Mobius. Yeah, I have a friend who's got the Marvel Unlimited subscription, and he loves it. And he reads everything. It's like his stories.
I think that's a really good plan if you want to read Marvel, that Marvel Unlimited subscription.
I hate reading on my little phone though. It's too small.
Well, you read on an iPad. You'd have to have an iPad to read.
I haven't noticed.
I've read digital comics on an iPad, and it's not bad.
Oh, I couldn't
like
fathom reading it on a cell phone. That's no.
Right. But before COVID, the Marvel stuff I read was out of the library. I started going to the library, and if I wanted to read something, I'd take it out of there.
I read all of Suicide Squad, Ostrander's Suicide Squad, on my phone while driving a taxi. Did not kill anybody. That's.
I loved the tarantula. He looked so. You're right. His pointy shoes were the dumbest thing in the world, but he looked cool.
Thinking who was the fight? David Johansen. Yeah.
I'm embarrassed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I did. Something like, went from one, and it helped that Jack Kirby went and did Pacific Comics in the early '80s. So I think I had a mail subscription to Captain Victory before the comic shop even.
Right.
Yeah.
I just find it highly ironic that the person who introduced me to the works of both Von Bodie and to H.P. Lovecraft is now a minister.
Well, he's certainly interested in the grotesque. I mean,
yeah.
Von Bodie was all right.
Speaking of H.P. Lovecraft, that just reminded me. There's some articles in the back of the Bitter Root here, which is in this comic. It deals a lot with race in that, and it takes place in the 1920s Harlem, in a family of monster hunters. And what happens is racism and hatred turn people into literal monsters at times. And that's part of what they're fighting. But in the back, there's articles on stuff like that. And they mentioned the name of this is Into the Afro-Weird Abyss, Contemplating Racecraftian Horror.
Well, there was a whole,
and it's a phrase that popped up I had never heard before, and it's new, racecraftian, and it's of course related to Lovecraft and how he made horror, and how black horror artists developed this sort of genre where the horrors of racism become real horrors in horror novels. And that's kind of what this is racecraft, and it was really interesting little article on that because I'd never heard the term before. And
Get Out.
There was a recent series on HBO that was called Lovecraft.
They mentioned that,
Lovecraft
Country. They mentioned that as racecraftian horror.
That's sort of cool.
But I was like, I never thought of that before.
Now, if they just combine that with steampunk,
it's just here's this existential dread. This existential dread connected to black identity and its dark constrictions is what made me ponder the affordances of what I call racecraftian horror. It borrows from tenets of weird fiction, but both subverts and critiques it through changing the viewpoint to a decidedly more black cultural lens. The weird morphs and bends into the Afro-weird. I was like, that's an interesting horror concept there.
Sounds perfect.
That's what Lovecraft Country is doing too. I've watched some of that, but not all of it.
Of all the people to still be talking about 100 years after they die, H.P. Lovecraft. Weird.
Do you know why H.P. Lovecraft is as popular as he is these days?
No one knows.
No, it's because the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. That's what.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Introduced Lovecraft to the vast majority of people that know about him now.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
So the guy who created the Call of Cthulhu was a complete weirdo. Oh
yeah. He was sort of a what's the word? Have you ever read Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut? Yeah. He talks about this. He was a rang. It's a technical term from Kurt Vonnegut, but it means somebody who does everything wrong so that they can show you how to be nothing like them at all. If you read about his, I read some biographies about him when I actually did a comic that's very much in this vein, which is why I'm sort of blown away by this. I did this comic book called Bust a Lovecraft. Have I mentioned this?
I think I remember that name, Busta Lovecraft, but I don't remember. Tell us about it.
It's my best-selling comic ever. My wife and I did this comic where Busta Rhymes travels back in time and punches H.P. Lovecraft in the face because he's racist. It's based on a true story, but
based on a true story.
So I've sold thousands of copies of this comic. This is this is my best-selling comic of all time. He has to do this because H.P. Lovecraft's racism is causing Y2K. So in order to make this comic, I had to obviously do all my research and read a lot of biographies of Lovecraft and listen to a lot of music by Busta Rhymes because, what kind of maniac wouldn't? Anyway, so I read H.P. Lovecraft's biography, and it's written in this tone of sustained wonder because it's written by a professional writer. And H.P. Lovecraft did everything wrong. Like, it makes no sense at all that we're talking about him because he was absolutely nobody. It's like if you went 100 years in the future and you said, yeah, you all like movies, then they're like, oh yeah, that movie, The Room. Like, that was the greatest movie of all time. We don't remember anybody else. You like Star Wars? Like, nope. Doesn't really matter. But did you see The Room? It's exactly like that. It makes no sense. Like, he was alive at the same time as Robert Howard and the guy who wrote Maxwell Gibson, and the guy who wrote The Shadow, all these incredibly accomplished, incredibly popular writers, and he outshines them all. And he did nothing right. He did nothing during his life. He had a bunch of cats. He was very racist to them.
I actually think Robert E. Howard was a better writer.
Yeah. H.P. Lovecraft was so racist that people in 1920 were like, dude, you're racist. Robert Howard wrote him letters where he said, you should tone down the racism.
I was going to ask if you've read any of the correspondence between those two guys, because it's really interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They're both ideas, they're bouncing off each other. And then when Clark Ashton Smith and August Derleth get a hold of it, it just kind of snowballs.
Yeah. I mean, these are, and they there was an entire genre. These were people that were writing the comic books of their day. Weird fiction and newspaper story. I mean, like, story magazines were enormous.
Oh, you're talking about Walter Gibson. He's actually one of the best-selling writers of the 20th century.
Yeah, and
Stephen King would kill to have his circulation numbers.
If Walter Gibson's books, each of his books sold 1/10 as much as a normal person's books, he'd still be ahead because he wrote like 500 books. Anyway, so the fact that H.P. Lovecraft, who was basically just this weird fanboy that everybody hated, who wrote these stories in which nothing happened. It's not like the concept of plot and character had not been invented in 1920. They were like,
I can't remember when and where I saw this, but somebody came up with the theory that the modern take on UFOs and aliens actually comes from Lovecraft.
How so?
And I'm like, I think it's the introduction to the Elder Gods from Another Planet, and there's certain things I'd have to go back and find it, but they kind of like traced down they did some analysis and traced down the number of that kind of stories before and after Lovecraft was writing, and it was interesting because there's a little trickle, and then after that it was boom. It was like interesting. Yeah. So.
I wonder if Eric von Daniken was a fan of Lovecraft.
Who knows? Maybe. I think Lovecraft actually invented Eric von Daniken.
Eric von Daniken doesn't exist. He's only H.P. Lovecraft.
There was a guy before Eric von Daniken. I can't remember who it is.
Yeah.
But there was like Eric von
Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, or was that somebody else?
Eric von Daniken is the Chariots of the Gods guy from the 70s who wrote the famous book about aliens coming down and starting the human race. But there was I can't remember who it is now, because you always see there was actually a guy who came up with the same idea and was popular like 10 years before Eric Van Daniken.
Yeah,
I cannot remember who it is.
The guy's name.
Yeah,
his last
name.
I
was surprised. I was like, "There's a guy before him."
Well,
yeah, there were a bunch going on.
Some interesting stuff with Atlantis, but way before that. But
yeah,
you're talking about his last name is Palmer. I can't remember his first name.
Was Lovecraft not published more after his death?
Infinitely more. Infinitely.
Yeah.
He was barely published at all in his life. His big success during his life was he co-wrote a story with Harry Houdini, and it wasn't any good. Like that was it. He was nobody. I mean, he was mostly known for being a fanzine, for running fanzines. His stories were not interesting to people because they aren't really interesting stories. I think the reason Lovecraft is his stories are satisfying, and like I went through my Lovecraft phase just like everybody, is he sort of puts up this like cloud of words and you choose your own path through it.
You know? I've never read Lovecraft.
Half the words are squamous and gibbous, which you don't see in other writers. So
yeah, Rugos, yes, yeah, he really Catonic. That was a good one.
I mean, I don't think Edgar Allan Poe was really all that popular when he was alive either. I think most of his popularity was after he died.
You know that.
One person's read Charity of the Gods. Look at that.
I love that crazy stuff. Yeah.
It's called Jack Kirby's Eternals.
Yeah, that's where he got
Kirby was actually heavily influenced by.
Yeah, he was really into it. Yeah, and he did that. He did that movie Argo. Like, did you ever see his designs for Argo?
Oh yeah, that was for the fake movie Argo.
Yeah, but nobody told him it was fake.
Right, they were wild.
It was the CIA thing that he
to get the hostages back.
Actually plotted out this fake amusement park.
But nobody told him it was fake. I think he was hired. Yeah, he was hired to do the real thing. He really put a lot into it. If you look into the designs, they're stunning. But they're all very Eric von Daniken type stuff.
Designed by Jack Kirby. Do you know how awesome that would be?
Yeah. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, honestly.
Money.
Did you see the Eric Larson tweet from sometime this week after the Eternals trailer dropped? He did one of those what you expect and what you would get tweets, and what you expect was the Jack Kirby drawing of the Eternals spaceship, and what you get was the rectangle in the trailer. I was like, oh,
yeah. Well,
I loved puzzling out Jack Kirby's Eternals as a kid.
Yeah,
because like I only had bits and pieces of it, and like the first issue I ever got of it was the one of the cosmic powered Hulk. And for those who don't know, Jack Kirby's Eternals was out of Marvel's continuity. It was not supposed to be in continuity Marvel. So they did this 2-issue storyline where they obviously told him to use some Marvel characters. So he had these like college kids try to make this Hulk robot, and then like one of the deviants or Eternals, I don't even remember, made him cosmically powered him somehow, and he became a live rampaging Hulk. And they had this whole Hulk story with this kind of fake Hulk in it. And I just remember, and this was a time I can remember between reading Omega the Unknown, which once again was one about the same time. I was 10, 11, 12, right around there. And and Omega the Unknown, I got like all at once. Someone had like given me all the issues, or I bought them in the neighborhood or something. And there's something about, and it's like I could perceive there was something like in Omega the Unknown, like you could see it changing creative directions a couple of times as it. And there's even like talk of it in the back of it. So here's my little 11-year-old mind, not only figuring out the comic book, but figuring out that people make comic books, and figuring out that there's the people who make the comic books and other people who tell them things that they have to do, like put the Hulk in this comic book. And like the Eternals helped me figure that stuff out, and because I'd be sitting there going, I'm like, why is that? I was trying to figure out why a cosmic powered Hulk would exist beyond why he exists in the story, but why he would why I'm reading a story of the cosmic powered Hulk when I could just be reading a story of the Hulk. What's going on here? What's the story? And that part of it, and there was some of that going on. And though I loved figuring out the actual story of the Jack Kirby Eternals too, you could see where the comic was failing, so they changed direction with the comics. You can see like in the Eternals annual, I think they were doing a whole thing with like mostly the deviants. So it was like taking a different direction in the comic in the annual, where they could because it was an annual. So that's one of the things I liked about Jack Kirby's Eternals too, is it taught me about making comics.
Yeah, there's a moment when you're a kid when you realize, hey, people make this stuff. I think my daughter's sort of going through that right now. Or she's
with you making comics in the house, she might get some sort of clue.
I've told her she doesn't graduate from the family till she helps me make a comic book.
How old is she now, Jeff?
She's 8.
Okay.
I was going to make her work on my Civil War comic, but I think I've abandoned that project. It's just too fucking depressing.
Age 8 is a pretty good age to start learning about Jack Kirby. Yeah.
I remember I was told by Chris Geruso and Chris Geruso and Greg Schiegel were having this discussion once, and they said I found out a little earlier than most that people made comics because I was 10 when I consider myself 10 when I started collecting comics. And with Hulk 200, and then Hulk 203 or 204, Herb Trimpe drew instead of Sal Buscema, and I was just like, "Why does the Hulk look funny?" And that's when I, through my investigating, I discovered there was a credits box. Oh look, there's names in this box over here.
What really helped a lot was reading Keith Giffen's Ambush Bug, because it was all about because the editor was a major character. Actually, G.I. Joe. Yes, that's G.I. Joe is really important to me. When did you start reading G.I. Joe?
To death.
Oh my
Once
God.
again, Herb Trimpe making people realize that some of this art is just wrong. Or maybe he was the right one. I don't know, because he started.
He would come right after Russ Heath, and you'd be like, okay, one of these guys owns the toys and is drawing the toys, and the other guy is just like, I don't know, a tank.
Russ Heath could draw a tank.
Oh my God, could he draw?
Nobody could draw a tank like Russ Heath.
Yeah.
No, even to this day, I don't think there's anybody who draws tanks.
There's one specific image that's burned into my brain of the tiger.
Right, his most famous double-page spread tank.
Like. Yeah.
People would swipe Russ Heath's tank drawings.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you know what my most iconic Russ Heath comic is, or art is? That big whole page ad of buy your own Roman soldiers.
Oh, yes.
He did those.
Yeah,
and the army ones. I love those, man.
Yeah, those are very iconic ads.
Yeah.
Whoa,
iconic.
Yeah.
I don't know if iconic is proper in the phrase.
Well, they're pictures of their drawings of statues. So, yeah, I think that's fairly iconic.
Well, it either to be iconic, it either has to be picture-like, or have an element of worship to it. So if you want to say you have an element of worship towards those Russ Heath ads, well then,
it's
iconic for you. Otherwise, they're just famous because every comic fan knows them from that era.
The one that was iconic for me was the Jack Davis ad where you had Dr. J and Rick Barry with the Spalding basketball.
Okay.
Yes.
It was like there's nothing better in this class than seeing Jack Davis draw Dr. J dunk a basketball.
If I had to pick one that I'd call iconic because there's an element of worship to it, it would be the Big Jim ad by Jack Kirby.
Yeah, for me it was.
Yeah.
So I loved that Dr. J one. I really did. Rick Barry and Dr. J. I did.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Matter of fact, if I win the lottery, I'd like to find out whoever owns that and just throw money at them till they give it to me.
Get that original art.
I bet you if you found out who actually drew it, you'd be like, oh, that makes sense. Like when I found out that Kyle Baker drew a bunch of the Garbage Pail Kids, I was like, oh.
He just told us who drew it. It was
Jack Davis drew it.
Jack Davis.
Oh, it is Jack Davis. Oh, yeah, of course. Because now I'm looking at it in my mind. Yeah, that's Jack Davis. Yep. Man, Jack Davis was great.
He was.
Oh, God, I posted one on my Facebook page several months ago that he did basically an illustration. It's kind of hard to call it kind, but it's an illustration of two boxers, and it is cartoony, but it's realistic at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And I'm looking at this like, man, he was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. His
I was looking at the crowd reacting to what's going on is like
he had an interesting observation about himself, where he said he's not as famous and well known as he could be because he never was on a comic for very long. He never had a, Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I think that's true. Very. Right. He was a well-known mainstream. I mean, he did covers of TV Guide, so of course, but no one knew. Your average person didn't know his name.
True.
And your average comic fan didn't know his name either.
Well, also the average comic fan would equate him with EC, and then very little after that.
Your average comic fan didn't even know EC that much. You have to be older than me to have read EC comics.
EC was something that you read about in the back of other people's comics. You never actually saw it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also he had a really anonymous name. Like Jack Davis is just difficult doesn't really stick in your head.
Right.
Like I would always spot his work whenever it popped up in pop culture stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. He did the poster for It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. He did that.
I don't know.
Was that him?
I don't know if that was him or if that was. I'm not really sure.
But he did a lot of well-known, famous illustrations.
Oh, yeah.
But like he observed about himself, he just was not that well known because.
Well, going back to Mad, 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 Mad World, it's interesting because Saul Bass did the titles for that.
Yeah.
And hating to use the term again, but how iconic of a guy Saul Bass is in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, at the time,
Ray Harryhausen of titles,
At the time, these guys were just trying to pick up a paycheck, and that's why I sort of love comic book conventions, because all these guys just really thought they were doing like disposable work for kids. They had no idea that like people would be like writing books about it.
I don't think that's necessarily as true as the stories say, because there were plenty of guys who loved their work and wanted to keep it.
That's true.
You made Comic Crack chime in with when you mentioned Saul Bass.
Yeah, I mean,
because I always hear that
absolutely is.
That's always the excuse that's given why these guys don't have copyright on their work.
Yeah.
They weren't every guy who did painting for every book cover out there got their paintings back. It was only in comics you didn't get their art back, and it was because they didn't want to give them back.
Huh.
I've not seen
that movie.
Yeah, Phase 4 is about killer ants, and it's not them. It's a completely different style of movie.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's more it's more of a psychological horror, if you want to think of it that way.
Does it like look like a Saul Bass animation? I mean,
no,
I'm looking at
it does not.
bad.
No, you would not. You would just see it, and you would not immediately attach his name to it.
Okay, yeah, Saul Bass was pretty old when he did that. I think he was just sort of.
He directed a couple movies.
Yeah,
insects taking over the world, but I think we've got the final definitive word on art and comic book companies, and they kept it just because they could. By looking at now, when it was inconvenient for them to give the work back, they just kept it. Yep. They would rather keep it than spend a dime to give it back. Now, when it's inconvenient for them to even collect the art, they don't want to see it. You don't even hand in anything but scans to Marvel and DC these days.
Yeah.
They don't want to see the original art. Why? Because now it's going to cost them money to get that artwork in there. And so that to me tells me all I need to know about back then is that they only kept the artwork because they could, and it was more convenient and cheap for them.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with anything but that, because otherwise they'd be collecting the artwork now, wouldn't they? And they're
same
not.
thing with pulp magazines too. There were so many, covers that would sell for thousands, if not millions of dollars now that just got thrown in the garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
there were entire stories that got thrown in the garbage. Like you remember that comic Punks that Keith Giffen did for Valiant?
Oh yeah.
There was an issue 3.
I never read it. No.
There was an issue 3. I read it. They had it in one of those flat files. Big flat. They had an entire issue of Punks that was done and sitting in the flat file, and they just never got around to printing it.
Right.
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
But that's a different thing than what he's talking about. But I think did most pulp paintings, because illustrators got their paintings back. That was standard.
Yeah.
I don't know how the pulp specifically worked. But being that there was value to painting, and you're not going to spend a week making a painting and hand it over and then not have them hand it back. That, and what I didn't realize until recently, another reasons they handed it back was the tax implications. If you
study enough history, you realize how much things were influenced just by taxes.
Yeah, because and I think that's another reason that book cover paintings were handed back too, because people mention that about if you pay $1,000 for somebody to paint your cover, then you pay them $1,000. If you pay them $1,000 and you've bought the physical cover, you now owe tax, a sales tax on that physical cover.
No, it's not mine anymore. You can have it.
The person.
That's a really good point.
That's what I never realized that before I read. Somebody pointed that out in the comic art thing. They were like, "Oh, if you're saying Marvel and DC bought all that art, where's the sales tax?" We didn't really buy it. We just took that. And then that's another reason why they say it's a gift for them to give it back, because that means they didn't buy it or something crazy.
That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
And when it comes to, when you're and these illustrators in the beginning of the 20th century were rock stars.
Yes.
They were, think about it. There was no radio, there was no TV, there was magazines and newspapers, and those illustrators from the earliest part of the 20th century were rock stars, and they were paid like it. Yeah. So if you're paying, James Montgomery Flagg $10,000 in 1910 or whatever he worked, I don't remember. You don't want to pay the tax on that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a chunk of money.
Yeah, that's real money.
Consider how fly by night a lot of publishers were. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But on the high end, and that's where stuff gets established in that high end. There was no high end of comics when comics started, so they just kept the artwork because they could. It would cost them money to return it, so they weren't going to do it.
That's really, and that explains why it was such a big issue in the 70s and the 80s for, like, before they did any of the stuff about equitable pay and royalties and stuff like that. The artists, the first thing they agitated for was to get their art back. It must have been like a prestige thing because everybody else got their art back and they didn't.
And keep in mind, these were guys who were coming from other areas. Neil Adam, Mike, they were all illustrator guys. They were looking to illustrate comics and be illustrators, and they knew how it worked. They knew Marvel and DC were doing something wrong.
It's also interesting how many of the comics artists I like went on to eventually become illustrators.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you go where the money is.
And also, I've like I said, the story is always, they didn't even know they were doing something good and didn't want their art back. And I've read artists from back then say, that's not true. We wanted our art back. They wouldn't give it to us.
I know you're not supposed to say it during the show, but this is an interesting one. I'm learning a lot here. This is really interesting.
If you go back far enough in time to go back to like the first guy who painted a cave painting in France somewhere, it's like a mammoth. There was some guy standing next to him said, "I'll give you 2 rocks for that."
I just read
royalties someday.
I just read an interesting thing about those cave paintings 40,000 years ago or whenever, that were all over the world, where they discovered that there was in fact a climate event at that time, which I think it was sunspots. It had something to do with the sun being so they think that people had to go and live in caves at that time, and there may have in fact been art before then, but it was not done in caves. It was done out in the open as everybody else lives. And we only know the art from the caves because people had to live in caves for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
so they did their art on the cave wall.
Equivalent of a fossil. It got preserved and other things didn't. Yeah.
Right. Because before that, they always thought that there was like an artistic flowering 40,000 years ago when all this cave art appeared around the world. And something happened with the human mind that we discovered art then. But it turns out it may just be that everybody had to live in caves then, and there was art before then. None of it survived.
You know, those I know that the Lascaux paintings in France and a few other ones are way the heck back there. Like they aren't
they're deep in caves, which makes sense when you think they were living in those caves. They weren't just they weren't spelunkers. The sun was so strong and would kill you if you were out in it that they were living in those caves. So you can't go out there into the sun.
It also been the equivalent of like the guy's wife didn't want his comic book collection to be in their living room. So he had to stick it back in the back room somewhere.
See, that's why I think in the fullness of time they're going to figure out through DNA sampling and all this stuff exactly who painted those paintings, and they're going to get royalties.
Sure.
Yeah, when it's all said and done. I mean, I have a very grim view of the future, and that's part of it.
Roy,
it's
all that money.
It's 70 years. It's life of creator plus 70 years. So they've been dead for over 70 years.
That's true. It is public domain.
Yeah, poor Uber Eats guys.
Having said that, all right, here's an interesting science fiction story. What if the technology got to the point where they found a DNA sample that could clone the guy?
Yeah. And
Does he legally qualify to get compensation at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's like, well, he's not dead now. So the rights revert. Oh my God, that would be hilarious. What if somebody cloned like Louis Armstrong and be like, look, he's not dead now. You gotta pay this.
Or Willie Dixon, gets cloned, and like Jimmy Page is like, damn.
Retired. Illustrators used to be rock stars.
Yeah.
Some of them
they got paid quite well in some cases.
Oh, what was his name?
Wyeth owned like a quarter of Maine.
The Arrow collar guy.
J.C.
Leyendecker. Yeah, J.C. Leyendecker. He had a huge mansion across the river in Westchester.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, I've stayed in Andrew Wyeth's guest house once. Like those guys own a lot of property.
N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth, both.
Yeah, have you ever been to the Brandywine Museum?
Sounds familiar.
Oh,
is it up there? Is that the one that's up there?
It's in Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, which is like right near the Delaware border. Okay. And it has the vast majority of N.C. Wyeth's paintings, and a lot of the others, like Andrew.
Oh yeah.
These paintings are huge. I mean, you do not what's the word I'm looking for? Reproductions of those in books do not do them justice.
Yeah.
I mean, they're huge. They're like 15, 20 feet across. And
well, that's probably why. I mean, one, you probably had to work that big to get your work photographed at the time, and two, that's probably why I wanted them back.
Right.
Yeah.
It's impressive. It really is.
I would love
Norman Rockwell's paintings were as big as a wall.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dean Cornwell. I mean, all the really classic illustrators. God, man, those guys were good too.
I'm always telling my wife she needs to work bigger. Like her paintings need to be much bigger.
Yeah,
that's what people want. I went to an art museum a couple months ago.
That's what rich people want.
Yeah.
William Stutson, one of his favorite artists he's ever done is the large murals he's done for the Natural History Museum in San Diego, and they're huge. 20 feet tall. Yeah.
San Diego. Now there's a town that respects comic books.
Have
you all ever been to San Diego when it's not Comic-Con?
No,
I've never been.
You know what they do?
What?
They talk about Comic-Con. They're like they talk about the one that just happened, and they talk about the one that's coming up next. It's like it's seriously, it's like the pet of the city. They love it.
But it's always interesting how you see this articles, and they're clickbait in some regards, but you see an article like every 5 years that's, were they going to move to Anaheim? Are they going to move to LA? Wherever it may be.
No. If they moved Comic-Con, you know what would happen? San Diego would just start another one, and it would be more popular than the one that just left.
They've actually done that.
Yeah, Jester.
There's another, I don't remember the name of it, but there's one that's aimed specifically at comics again and not for, popular.
It's called Jester. Yeah, Jill Thompson's really big into it. I've never done it because it's prestigious. But
I
yeah,
like Jill. She's good.
she's real good. You know, she needs to work harder.
And we're talking about artists that use models earlier.
Uh-huh.
P. Craig Russell uses, well, I don't know if he does as much now, but he used to use her a lot as a model. Sometimes in the stories you can see, like, oh yeah, that's Jill. Yeah.
Oh, you know who else? Fucking Wendy Peeney got her start as a model for Frank Thorne.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She was the model for a lot of Red Sonja.
Yeah, there's pictures of her from cons.
Yeah. Wild.
Dressed up as Red Sonja.
I think, like you were talking about how expensive models were before, but I think they used to actually be cheaper, at least by a percentage of your income.
Well, they're not. They weren't a special. So you could hire a figure model right now for a couple of $100 for a day.
Yeah.
If you're making $10,000 a week,
yeah,
which is probably the equivalent of what these guys were making, that's nothing.
I'm absolutely convinced that Gil Kane would just like do a figure drawing and then draw a comic book page around it for a lot of that Captain Victory stuff.
Yeah.
Like
no, Captain Victory was Kirby.
Oh no, what did he do? Whichever his was.
Hawk, Silver Hawk, what Hawk? Black Hawk?
He did a bunch of stuff.
Well, Gil Kane did a science fiction comic. It's called Starhawks.
The Starhawks. That's what
Gil Kane had like 4 ex-wives to support.
Ouch.
So he was a hard-working dude.
That's why he stole artwork.
Yeah. Oh, he didn't.
Got banned from Marvel
for stealing artwork.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
No,
that and double vouchering. Jim Shooter's got the whole double vouchering story on his blog. Check out his blog sometime.
I will check that out. Yeah, he did Black Mark, but he did Captain something or other.
I don't know. He did something called Savage.
He did a lot of different stuff.
Yep.
I mean, the only reason to read Gil Kane, you know, like the enemy in practically every Gil Kane comic is a particularly terrifying piece of texture, but the man could life draw. I mean, if you wanted, like, you look at Gil Kane drawings, and literally every muscle is under tension and twisted. You know, like if you were modeling for Gil Kane, he'd be like, no. All right, there. You know, can you twist your thumbs some more? He's that's why I love him. But I mean, like, the man was not a good writer.
Yeah, there's a Gil Kane pose that everybody copied, which was the person lying down on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one like this.
Not until the Blair Witch Project would we see so much of the inside of somebody else's nose.
Damn, these Gil Kane upshots are dramatic. I think that was an ambush bug or something.
Yeah, where I actually know the exact line. It's like where he's pretending to be a librarian. Like, my boy, when did you say these books were due, my boy? Every issue of Ambush Bug lives in my head.
Ambush Bug is so good. Every time somebody mentions Deadpool, I got 2 words for you. They're Ambush Bug.
Yeah, Ambush Bug was my favorite. Also came out in '86.
Well, we're getting near the end of the show now, so we may as well wind down.
Okay.
Any questions from the audience?
Any questions from the audience before we go? Well, you guys have a good week out there. I always enjoy our commenters.
Well, thanks for the invite, guys. This was an interesting one.
Glad you could make it and be our substitute, Tim.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't in a moving car this time.
Well, we have to go between H.P. Lovecraft and Ambush Bug.
It's not easy to find somebody who talks as much as Tim, so, you know.
That's true.
The coffee helps.
Yeah, it's good to have. All right, so everybody have a good week out there. I'm going to hit the end broadcast, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.